Hi, welcome back, guys. This is your friend. Welcome to Fanfiction World with another fiction. What if Deku become quirkless in Class 1B? Now, before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. If you more want video like this, now let's get into the fanfic. What's your master plan now? Surely you can see that the path to victory is forever closed to you. Should you surrender? I shall grant thee mercy and record your valiant battles in the annals of history, as those who almost defeated me. Izuku looked at his hand and into the confident eyes of his opponent, his actual opponent. Set, Pony, and Itsuka were not a threat. They were no longer an obstacle on his path to victory. They had too many cards left. It was down to him, and Ryuko, her declaration of Uno, had laid the pressure at his feet. He knew he was the only one that could hold off the fierce warrior in her pursuit of victory. With a sly smile that made his opponent's lip tremble. Wild card draw 4 color green. You fiend, how could you? Easily, my dear, Uno. Of course. They both lost as Itsuka went on a run, leaving the two stoic combatants hanging their heads in defeat, while Itsuka smiled. There is nothing better than snatching victory from those who are so confident in their victory. The group shared a laugh as the rest of the tables finished their rounds in the Class 1B tournament to crown the Grand Uno Championship. Detention was an exciting affair. In the end, Kinoko stood victorious, holding her plastic trophy over her fallen opponents. It's always the quiet ones, Set commented. And the Spanish Inquisition, Izuku added. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Rico and Pony added, looking at each other in surprise, which immediately sparked the two talking furiously about the brilliance of Monty Python. The two girls shifted their attention to Izuku as he filled out a form that Vlad-sensei had brought. What you go there, Greenie? Set said, peering over his shoulder. Her voice seductively whispered in his ear. He stiffened slightly and blushed, which was a victory for Set. I am filling out a club form. You're joining a club? Rico asked, her focus now totally on what Izuku was doing. Trying to start one, he replied. I want it to be a culture club where students gather to share movies, music, and books. Then we talk about it and share out thoughts. That sounds like fun, Set said. I was expecting you to do some sort of fight club. The first rule of Fight Club, Izuku said in a mock serious tone. To everyone's surprise, it was Kinoko who responded. You do not talk about Fight Club. Everyone was in shock. The Grand Uno champion shrugged and smiled. What? My grandpa loves that movie. Izuku laughed. Yay, which is my plan for a club. I need to get some initial signatures and find a teacher to be our advisor. But you're right, Set. I did look into a combat club, but I have spent my whole life fighting and learning to fight. It's not as if the school will keep teaching us, and recently, I have been exposed to a whole different part of life, and I want to try to enjoy it as much as I can. So, you're creating a club? She replied. Exactly. If any of you are interested, let me know, he said with a smile. Pony and Ryuko blushed, as if he was talking about them. Little did they know he was. Ryuko immediately floated a pen over to herself and signed up, followed by Pony. Set sat there thinking about it, and also decided to sign her name. She looked over at Itsuka. What? You must admit that sounds like fun, except for the reading part. I get to hang out and call it club activities. You going to sign up? I don't know. I will think about it. It does sound like something fun to look forward to after the crap sandwich of the first week. And who knows how the rest of it will go. After class, as the workout group was stretching and loosening up, Izuku mentioned the club to his friends from 1A. Kyoka practically yelled yes, much to her embarrassment. Toru thought it sounded like fun, and even Momo said she would consider it. Today, Kyoka and Toru were working with Izuku on the quirk tests. Because their quirks didn't naturally give them an advantage in most trials, they focused on technique and tests. Momo and Pony were working on their hand-to-hand combat under the watchful eye of Haruo, who was walking them through some of his family's martial arts techniques. The entire group decided to end the exercise with a run, which was definitely in Pony's favor. They agreed that they would focus all their remaining sessions and just the quirk assessment testing to improve the girls' score. Toru and Kyoka were nervous, but found hope in seeing that they had already improved. Kyoka was finding it hard to concentrate, as the proximity was proving distracting. Izuku was struggling, having to be pressed up close to both girls to adjust forms. The next day when class started, Vlad-sensei called the course to attention before he turned to the door and called for someone to enter. The class watched as the girl who had attacked Tetsu and thrown acid at Midoriya entered, followed by the girl who smacked Itsuka. The second girl stepped forward and bowed deeply. "I am Ochako Uraraka, and I want to apologize to the entire class for my actions in the lunchroom, especially to you, Itsuka Kendo. I had no right to smack you. I don't even know why I did it. I was embarrassed and humiliated for my actions during that day. Izuku Midoriya, I also would like to offer my apologies for even being part of the fight. You stepped forward and saved me during the entrance exam, and I never even had a chance to thank you properly or tell you how excited I was to see that you made it. I humbly ask for everyone's forgiveness and the opportunity to show you the type of person I am and the hero I hope to be one day." The pink girl stepped forward, fighting back tears, and bowed profoundly. "I am Mina Ashido, and I am just an idiot. I should have stopped Ijiro from doing anything after the fight started. Instead, I jumped on Tetsu's back like an idiot and fired off my acid at you, Izuku Midoriya. I reacted instead of acting properly, and how a student at UA should. I have no words to justify my actions. All I can do is beg for your forgiveness." She sank to her knees and bowed her head to the ground. The class turned and looked at the affected students. Itsuka got up first, followed by Tetsu. Itsuka walked over to Ochako. "I forgive you. We all could have handled that day better, me included. I don't know you, but as a class member has said before, everyone deserves a second chance, but not a third." Tetsu walked over and knelt before Mina. "Hey, it's okay. I am guessing that dude is your friend, and you were just reacting. I get it. But try to see what's happening before jumping in next time. Your friend was in the wrong in a big way. You seem like a good person. Do better, alright?" Mina looked at him gratefully as she wiped a stray tear, Ochako doing the same to Itsuka. They both stepped aside and up walked Izuku. "Stand up, please," he said to Mina, who almost reluctantly did so. "Ochako, you have nothing to seek forgiveness from me for. Itsuka forgave you, and that is who needed to do it. I want to get to know you better, and I hope we can put all this behind us and maybe be friends. I am glad you also made it in. I wish our reunion would have been under different circumstances." Ochako managed a smile and nodded her head. "I would like that too." "Mina, you threw acid at me that melted a table. Do you even realize the damage you could have caused had I not ducked out of the way? I don't know you either, but Toru speaks highly about you, and I can see the contrition on your face and the emotion in your words. I will give you a second chance. I am so sorry, Midoriya. I promise you won't regret it," she said. The two offered their apologies to the class again as they made their exit. Next in walked Ijiro. He stood at the front of the class and bowed. "Sorry for escalating an incident that should not have grown to the proportions that it did. I was dumb and not thinking. I ask for your forgiveness and the opportunity to put right what went wrong that day and to ensure we can all work together to better our future as pro-heroes. Sorry for attacking you, Midoriya." Izuku looked at Ijiro and could see the false sincerity. He didn't apologize for his role, and Izuku was sure that Ijiro still supported Bakugo's actions. With a shrug, Izuku responded, "That works for me." As much as he wanted to put the whole thing behind him, he knew it wasn't over yet. With those out of the way, they continued with their day. Izuku devoured his lunch before stepping away to try and meet with a few teachers about sponsoring the new club he was looking to form. It was on his way that he bumped into Ida, who asked if they could meet after detention. Izuku sensed not malicious intent, agreed to head to the faculty area. Thankfully, he managed to find Midnight, who had been his counselor since the incident in the infirmary. Being to avoid an encounter with Aizawa, as the man was asleep, was in both parties' interests. Professor Midnight sat, listened to his proposal, and looked over his application, a slight grin on her face. UA had some clubs, but most students didn't look for them. They mainly consisted of future leaders and other such things, or clubs that solely seemed to focus on quirks. On the other hand, this one focused on culture and experiencing new things with other students. In her opinion, everyone has a passion or something they had a fandom for, and sharing those with others wasn't done enough. Midnight was pleasantly surprised that Izuku was attempting to form the club, as his attention had been mono-focused on fighting and surviving due to their conversations. But something had changed after what had been described to her as a friend's trip to the mall. She would make sure to ask more in their next session. "I will be your group's advisor," she said, looking at the hopeful team. "Everything must also be submitted to me, and I will provide things for the group to look at and read. All groups must do some school service, and will also have to host and run a booth during the culture festival and submit something for the festival. I will file this and notify you when I have a room assignment." She took the papers and sent Izuku on his way. It was the class after lunch that had them all excited. It was their heroics, and it was their first class with All Might. After hearing from Ibara and Manga about their missed lesson, all the other students were excited to get into it. True to form, the number one hero entered with a booming voice and dressed to impress in his Silver Age costume, revealing the metal cases that held their hero costumes and calling for them to get to the training ground Delta. The class did their best to contain their excitement as they grabbed the cases and headed off. With the course already aware, and having dealt with the issue of Izuku's scars, it wasn't such an ordeal this time, and they were able to get changed quickly. Izuku dressed with a slight melancholic look in his eyes. The costume resembled an ensemble that his master once had. Izuku stood in black armored and reinforced pants, a matching titanium weave compression shirt, and a dark green leather armored vest. The cloak was a matching dark green with a hood. The cover was armored and reinforced to protect it from fire, bullets, knives, and other bladed weapons. He left the respirator hanging around his neck, securing a staff of what appeared to be black walnut with a twisted knob at one end and a sharpened blade at the other. Izuku felt his hand linger on his former master's favorite weapon, a few hidden blades and some not so secret. Then he outstretched his hand, and the black sword appeared. Securing it, he made his way out of the locker room. All other costumes canon. Ryuko and Pony spotted him first. As he exited, "Thou looks like a most formidable warrior of the days long ago, Izuku. I like the cloak. Perchance do you happen to look favorably upon my choices as well?" Ryuko asked. "Yes, I like the fur trim at the collar, and the boots best suit you, Ryuko. And yours is also cool, Pony. It matches your personality and quirk," Izuku said, complimenting the girls before he turned and saw Hiryu approaching. "Dude, you look cool. Are you ready for this?" "Unlike you others, I was born ready," he said with a false mocking tone, causing Izuku and Pony to laugh and Ryuko to hide her smile behind her arm. "If only you all wanted to proceed into battle looking so," Naoto was saying, moving his hand in a circular motion. "Barbaric. When of course, elegance is what is called for." Shihai, also dressed in all black, walked over and slapped Izuku on the shoulder. "Good color choices." Eventually, they were all just gathered together, complimenting each other's costumes. Set was about to try and prank Izuku by pulling the sword when he made her main body eep as he grabbed her hand that was floating over. "I wouldn't do it, Set. It doesn't like being touched." Itsuka, who was talking with Yui and Kanoko, looked over as Set was blushing slightly. Looking past her, she saw Izuku had captured the lizard splitter's hand and was lightly and suggestively stroking Set's palm. One of the few times in Itsuka's life, she saw Set tap out in the middle of a tease and ask for her hand back. All Might stepped emerged, calling everyone back to attention before giving them the rundown, and their 2v2 battles, hero, villains, bomb, etc. He expected a flurry of questions and concerns as he had received from one, but instead was greeted with, "Yes, sensei." They all stepped forward and drew their lots. Team Ayosu Awase and Jiroda Shishida vs. Team Fue Kodai and Satsuna Takage. Team B Sen Kaibara and Nirangeki Shoda vs. Team G Kinoko Komori and Manga Fukadashi. Team C Toguru Kamakiri and Pony Tsunatori vs. Team H Izuku Midoriya and Rieko Yanagi. Team D Shihai Kiriwara and Kosai Tsuburaba vs. Team I Ibara Shiozaki and Juzo Honuki. Team E Itsuka Kendo and Tetsutetsu vs. Team J Naito Monoma and Huryu Rin. Match 1. Yui and Satsuna walked into the building, moving to the area with the bomb. Satsuna seemed to be talking as Yui was quiet. But they saw a wicked grin spread across the girl's face, and Satsuna threw her head back and cackled loudly. Awase and Jiroda decided to take the head-on approach. Jiroda went beast mode, ripped some handrails off, and passed them back for Awase to weld together as an improvised weapon. Jiroda began to surrender to the animal side and raced off ahead. As he burst into the room where the girls were, he had no concern with the bomb, choosing instead to attack Yui, who was standing in the center. Awase chased after his teammate and burst into the room. Suddenly, Yui smiled and placed her fingertips together. Awase immediately felt a moment of dread as the room was completely bare. Though it did not stay that way for long, as office furniture, oil barrels, and crates appeared above them and came crashing down with thunderous force. Awase attempted to find shelter only to find the door locked. In the chaos, he felt his arms wrenched behind his back as he tried to free himself from the rubble, and the capture tape slipped into place. All Might announced his capture, and he fell to the ground in defeat. Jiroda was able to free himself and began to throw the rubble around wildly. He couldn't locate Yui, and when a vial collided with his face, he roared at the liquid as the smell of jasmine invaded his nose, rendering his sense of smell useless. Due to the effect of his quirk, he just rampaged wildly till time ran out. Yui emerged from a room on the first floor where she had sought shelter, and the Set reassembled herself, floating the bomb down from the rafters. After the teams regrouped in the observation room, Set and Yui received praise for their well-crafted plan and successful execution. Set was named the MVP for her exceptional ability to develop the strategy and flawlessly utilize her classmates' quirk. It was imposing. Match 2. This match was more of a demolition derby, with Sen and Nirn just running at their opposition with devastating effects. Just when it looked like Kinoko and Manga were on the verge of defeat, the room covered in dust exploded into an assault of mushrooms. Kinoko had hidden her spores all over the room, and now, with them not only airborne but in the respiratory system of their opponents, they began to choke and panic as their breath was being denied them. Manga then dropped the boom on them, literally and figuratively, when he rushed to try and capture them, though Nirn twin impact exploded, knocking him and Manga unconscious. Now, hero, either these surrender or my precious spores will make their way to your brain, where you will become my servant for life. Ha 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 ha. Kinoko threw her head back and laughed manically. Can she do that? Naito asked from the safety of the observation room. Dude, Kinoko is kind of scary, Izuku said. And kinda hot, Toguru said much louder than he intended, prompting the class to turn and stare at the blade creator. He blushed furiously as he realized why they were staring at him. If any one of you say something, I will fucking cut you, he yelled. Now sleep, hero. When you awake, it will all be okay. Today the city, tomorrow the world, Kinoko said menacingly. Most of the boys in the observation room had to agree. They couldn't understand it, but it was pretty hot. With the last breath, Sen attacked Kinoko, sending the girl flying back. Unfortunately, the lack of oxygen caught up, and he passed out. Kinoko was named MVP, and All Might pulled her aside to talk to her about the mind control thing, and came back looking pale and writing furiously on the notepad. Match 3. Do not take your defeat to heart, my friends, Pony said as they made their way out of the observation room. I will not lose, she said, but the statement seemed to be directed more toward Ryuko. Neither will I, dear Pony, but fret not when Izuku celebrates our victory. Later I will send you a photo, Ryuko responded. Yumi fight, Toguru said, pointing at Izuku. Oh, yay, Toguru. Bring your best blade. I already have mine, Izuku retorted, patting his sword handle as they hit the cityscape. Good luck, Pony. You as well, Izuku, the girl replied with a smile. Riko smirked at Pony, where no one else could see. She latched onto Izuku's arm, causing the quirkless boy to freeze momentarily as two lovely, round squishy orbs pressed around his arm. Come, Izuku, let us depart and form our plans for victory. Sure, Riko, Izuku managed as the girl pulled him into the building. That bitch, Pony muttered in English. What? Toguru said. Nothing. I do not want to lose this match. Do you understand? Pony said with a fierce competitive tone. Izuku and Riko. What do you believe should be our plan, dear Izuku? I think they will come for us after that exchange. But I don't know if Pony's horns would count as her touching the bomb. So I believe we should hide it from sight just in case. We should see if we can separate them from tagging team them. I can immobilize Pony if you can capture her. Toguru might be too large for me to do the same. But if I draw him in, you can use the capture tape to take him out of the fight. I don't know if he can cut it off. But taking out Pony first will give us the advantage, at least in numbers. If all else fails, we can probably goad them into direct combat and see if we can obtain victory that way. I can work with that, try to separate and capture, or 1v1. And if we can secure victory, we help our teammate, Izuku said. Toguru and Pony. We go in and kick their asses, Toguru said. Yes, but the backup plan is good. Or I attack Izuku, and you deal with Riko. Pony offered. Can you handle Izuku? I do not know. We have trained together a lot, and he is very adept in the training room. But I have not engaged in much combat with him. Pony replied. Riko is going to be the difficult one with her quirk. She may be able to immobilize you, so we should focus on her first before taking out Izuku. I can beat him, so we don't have to worry, he said confidently. When the buzzer sounded, Toguru made their entrance. Being careful to avoid ambush, Riko and Izuku would launch range attacks from around corners, thanks to Riko's quirk. Pony fired her horns in retaliation, but the corridors made it hard for her to control them. Pony and Toguru were making their way down a corridor when suddenly a door flew open, and Pony was yanked inside violently. The door slammed shut, leaving Toguru separated from his teammate, as he heard a loud crash on the other side of the door like a large cabinet crashing against it. Pony rolled to her feet as Izuku launched a kick into her side. She gasped for breath, but immediately brought her arm down to trap his leg to deliver a potent counter kick. Pony's kicks were devastating in part to her quirk. Izuku was thankful for the body armor, as he was positive it would have resulted in broken ribs without it. As Izuku tumbled away, Pony fired her horns, hoping to disable him. But she saw a wicked glow around them and sent them crashing into a wall instead. She felt her body stiffen as the glow wrapped around her as Izuku speared her in the gut with his shoulder driving more air from her lungs. She struggled as best she could, but felt her arms pressed behind her back. She could see a blade tear through the door as Toguru attempted to cut his way in. Quickly, she fired her horns at Riko, forcing the girl to focus on the projectiles. meaning she could no longer hold Pony in place. As Izuku was driving her to the ground, she threw her arm over his head, wrapping around his neck as she pulled her legs up and around his waist, hoping to catch him in a guillotine choke. Izuku immediately moved to counter her attempt to bring her other arm in to complete the submission, as he took his other arm and grabbed at the nerve cluster in the lumbar and sacral plexuses, which broke her leg lock and allowed him to take them out and pull his head free. Pony's arms were immediately removed above her head in a suggestive pose that caused them to blush momentarily as the capture tape wrapped around Pony's wrists and her capture was called out. Izuku immediately scrambled off the girl as the top of the door was cut away. "You know what to do, Riko," Izuku called out, and she braced herself and pulled the cabinet away as Toguro burst in to get met by a drop kick from Izuku, sending him back into the hall. Toguro rolled with the kick and came to his feet, two blades forming from his hands. "Draw your blade so you may be measured." Izuku smirked, hoping to goad his classmate. He drew the staff. "You must prove worthy of my blade, hero, as I am now unimpressed," Izuku replied, doing his best to sound superior. "Then prepare for new lessons to be carved upon your body, so you remember me." Toguro bit back as he rushed forward. Izuku tossed his reinforced cloak towards his attacker, causing a momentary distraction that he used to strike at Toguru's chest with a thrust. Toguro was able to quickly counter back with a horizontal swing that forced Izuku to step back as Toguro pirouetted to close the distance with another swing of his blades as he went into attack mode. His dual wielding was off-balanced, Izuku noticed, having seen a master of it for many years up close and personal. Izuku let him press his attack till he saw the opening he knew was coming from the boy's swings. He then began to push back, the sharp edge of the staff providing point cuts to drive Toguro back as he faltered. Riko used the distraction to grab Izuku's discarded cloak and whip it out to tangle Toguru's legs, sending the boy crashing back. Izuku sprang forward and drove the pointed end of the staff down, stopping inches from Toguru's throat as All Might screamed out a warning. Toguro looked up at Izuku and saw no killing intent from his classmate. He knew that Izuku was in complete control. "You're dead," was all Izuku said. "Fuck, I yield," Toguro spat out. Izuku pulled the staff back and offered his hand. Toguro reluctantly took it as he got to his feet. "You weren't pressed, were you?" "A little. But I could tell you were off balance while dual wielding, and knew you would give me an opening and what I had to do to force that. Once we got you onto the defensive, you had forgotten about Riko, and that was the plan," Izuku said. "My teacher was an expert at that technique, dual wielding. If you like, I can give you some pointers with your quirk. I can only imagine how great you could be at it." "Nice pirouette, BTW. Dance class, my mom made me," he said as Pony and Riko rejoined them in the hallway. "Don't feel too bad. I had to learn some ballet." The girls stopped and giggled. "What it requires incredible balance, and that shit is hard." As Pony and Toguro walked ahead of Riko and Izuku, talking about the match, Ryuko quickly pulled Izuku into a room. She blocked the cameras and rose and kissed him. He tenderly returned the kiss. That was for the aquarium. She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him with much more fire. That was today. With a smirk, she walked away, leaving Izuku with a dazed and goofy look. In the observation room, though she protested, Ryuko was named MVP, as it was pointed out that Izuku had a plan. But I would not have worked without her and her execution. Thankfully, nobody seemed to notice the far-off look in Izuku when he walked in, and after he had a quick talk about All Might and weapon safety for some reason, it was enough for him to regain his composure. Match 4. Shihai and Kosai were able to work out a solid plan, but one that left them snatching victory with a mere second left on the clock. Kosai would knock out lights to give Shihai more areas to move, but Ibara's Vince and Juzo softening became a slog in every aspect of the word. Shihai desperately struggled against Ibara's vines. Her ability to have them attack from so many angles really had him on the ropes. But he was also able at times to drive her back due to being immobile while attacking, and the other two were a game of cat and mouse. In the end, Kosi managed to lay a fingertip on the bomb to give his team the win. Kosei was MVP for securing the win, as both teams had flawlessly put their plans into motion. Match 5. Huryu would harass and force Izuku and Tetsu to take cover and methodically make their way through the building. When Tetsu finally rushed forward, Mito stepped forward and touched the ground, trapping him in the ground with Juzo's quirk. For Izuku, it was when his hair turned into vines and the assault from Huryu that was her undoing. When Huryu slapped the capture tape on her, she hung her head in defeat. That was some bullshit, Mito. How did you copy their quirks? Izuku said. I asked. All Might allowed it as I was a villain in this scenario. I would have come in prepared for what heroes I would know that would be in the area due to patrol route, etc. I don't care. Can you get me unstuck now? Yelled Tetsu. Naito was MVP. Detention. For Class 1B's detention, they reviewed the footage with their teacher from the combat training, as he gave them pointers and tips. Class 1A had to draft a report on the significance of Raven's Law and its application in the modern world. Izuku and Ida. Izuku met the speedster of Class 1A in a private room as the classes emptied from detention. Ida bowed. I apologize for kicking you and for not having a better handle on those of my class that not only attacked you, but those who escalated the brawl to levels it should have never risen to. Honestly, Ida, you have no reason to apologize. There was no way you could have known that Bakugo was going to attack another student, despite his sunny disposition randomly. And I did punch you first. Yes, but I would have reacted the same way you did due to the information you had due to the actions of my class. I find it not only admirable that you are in the hero course, as a quirkless student you also placed first in the entrance exam. I was there and acted terribly to you, and you showed me that there was more to the exam with your actions to save Uraraka. You reminded me and showed me what it means to be a hero. I wanted to find you and thank you for that. So, if you would allow me now, thank you. There is no need to thank me, Ida. If you genuinely want to thank me, let us ensure our two classes' joint training goes off without conflict. Yes, let us do that. I would like to get to know you better, Izuku. You seem to be interesting. You seem rather nice yourself, Ida, and you pack a mean kick. Ida forced an envelope into his hand, and as his family insisted, Izuku tried to protest. But he could see this was important to Ida, so he just put it into his pocket as they exited the room. Hey, you wouldn't be related to Ingenium by any chance, would you? Izuku asked. A huge smile broke out on Ida's face. He is my brother. I am very proud of him. 1B stood across from 1A, the air thick with mistrust. Izuku stepped forward, as did Momo. I was thinking maybe we could have one member of each class sit next to another. It may not be the best idea, but we must break the tension somehow. So should we just call people out randomly, or see if someone volunteers? Izuku said. Ochako, would you care to sit with me? The gravity girl took a deep breath. If that's okay, I would like to get to know you better. The two boarded the bus, Sun Tzu and Ryuko, followed by Pony and Kyoka. The girls of each class soon followed, pairing up. Izuku smiled as the process was taking place. Glad to see the girls aren't holding a grudge, he said with a smile at Momo. We girls are more mature, naturally, Momo said with a dramatic hair flip and giggle. Well, someone has to be. Your class costumes all look pretty cool. I like yours too, Momo. Yes, it is kind of new. My other was a little more revealing due to the nature of my quirk, but after my first class with All Might, he directed me and Toru to the lab, where we were able to get fitted for Geno fabric, she said, pointing to the addition of armored legging and white tank top. A whole new costume is being constructed, but that takes time. They looked back at the class and saw just the boys, so they assigned them together to get them on the bus. Due to mismatched numbers, Izuku took the solo seat near his friends from both classes as the bus rumbled off to their joint training exercise. The girls were the first to fall into any real conversation, while some of the boys who weren't part of the stupid conspiracies theory started talking with their 1B brothers about how classes were treating them. When the topic of dentition was brought up, that seemed to bring all the classes together, as 1A had spent their time writing reports, and 1B had done some training, and even played some games. The story of the legendary Uno tournament brought out laughs and cheers at the retelling. Soon the conversation shifted to their hero outfits and standard school stuff. When they stepped off, it seemed that most of the tension was gone between the classes, with the hostility still focused on Izuku, which he didn't mind. Before them, they all paused as they took in the sight of the massive facility before them, the USG, unforeseen simulation joint. The imposing structure loomed before them. Such an enormous facility built on campus just added to the reminder that they were at the top hero school in the nation, and possibly the world. Kyoka walked over and shoulder bumped him. "Don't sweat it, Izuku. Are we still on for tomorrow?" she said, twirling a jack around her finger. "Yay, I am looking forward to it. Honestly, I am pretty excited. I like your hero outfit, Kyoka. It fits your vibe," he said, not noticing her blush. "Cool, so am I," she replied. "Yours is pretty dope as well. It seems to suit you." While her blush went unnoticed, it did not but some of her classmates, or Ryuko and Pony. "Dude, what the fuck is Gyro getting all chummy with that douchebag for?" Denki said. "Yay, doesn't he have his own classmates to hit on? He has been flirty with Toru and Momo. Didn't Sue go to the mall with him?" "Look, boys, just calm down," Ijiro said, walking up behind them. "Trust me, he is going to get his. And then Bakubro will be back with us." "Yay, well, don't wait too long. Iji, Ochako, and Ida are talking to that asshole now," Zero said, pointing to an enlarging group around Izuku. Ochako blushed as she explained the mishap with her costume design, but broke into a smile as she received reassurance that it looked good on her. Any further conversation was cut short when the doors opened, and their homeroom teachers and the renowned rescue hero 13 stepped out. Ochako lit up like a Christmas tree as she started gushing around her group about the rescue hero. 13 stepped forward, welcoming them to the USG, and explained that today's exercise's premise was teamwork and quirk control. They learned to use their quirks to aid rescue operations, even if they felt ill-suited. She drove this point home when she demonstrated her quirk black hole and a pile of rubble nearby, which did its job perfectly. Eraserhead stepped forward next. "I don't want any funny business today or any repeat of the cafeteria from a week ago. Any shenanigans will result in strict and immediate disciplinary actions. Look, children, I understand that there are hard feelings and lingering misunderstandings. I will not stand here and tell you that you all need to be friends or even need to like each other. But you do need to work together and put aside those differences for the greater good. Not only will you be called upon to put your lives in each other's hands, but there will be innocent civilians whose lives are in your hands. I promise you right now that should you let such things as harsh feelings between you lead to their preventable death, I will do everything I can to see you stripped of your licenses and punished to the fullest extent of the law if possible. You all came here to be heroes, each with your motivation and beliefs, but at the core of all, it is protecting the innocent people of our world. Do not let the dreams that have carried you this far be tarnished because you don't like someone's quirk or lack thereof. Be better, be heroes." "Yes, sensei," 1B responded, and so did a few members of 1A. Kyoka leaned towards Izuku. "Does he normally speak like that?" "He does," Izuku said with admiration. "First day Nito freaked some when he found out I didn't have a quirk. Vlad sensei came in and laid some hard truths on us, and we could squash it quickly and move on. I am glad he is my homeroom teacher rather than the alternative." "No shit. I feel like I am ready to take on anything right now," she responded. That was our teacher's normal speech, Don't mess up, or I will expel you. You know we haven't had a single basic combat course yet. The only kind we have had is what we did with you. That seems terrible on so many levels, Izuku responded, smirking at her. But you already knew how to throw a pretty good punch. It must come with the attitude. Kyoka instinctively punched him in the shoulder. Damn right. Don't make me give you a fresh one, she said, turning away to hide her smile. Good punch, but I like your smile even better, he said, following the group, leaving Kyoka sputtering and turning red. Toru laughed, placing a hand on her friend's shoulders, guiding her after the group. He won that round. Entering the massive doors, students commented on the interior and all the training zones around them. As they were doing so, Nito was looking over the railing when the lights flickered, and he saw a portal open, and people that looked like they didn't belong began to spill out. Vlad-sensei, please tell me this is part of the training, he said, stepping back. The two homeroom teachers looked down as another portal opened, and out stepped a slim man with pale skin, tinged. He was wearing plain red sneakers, black pants that exposed his ankles, and a matching long-sleeved V-neck shirt. Covering his arms and shoulders were what appeared to be hands. A hand was attached to his face, acting as a mask. The raid boss seems to be missing Kirigiri. He was followed by two others, a man whose entire body is made out of a dark purple mist, save for his eyes, which are glowing yellow. He wore an exquisite suit with a tie, and had a metal brace from around his collarbone to just below his eyes. According to our information, he was to be here, Kirigiri responded. The third was even more bizarre. It was a giant, black humanoid monster with a very muscular body with many scars. His brain is exposed on the top of his head, while his large eyes surround it. He has a beak-like mouth with an array of sharp teeth. It only wore beige pants and metal knee pads designed to emulate skulls. His feet and torso are left bare. Greetings, trash. I am Shigaraki, the leader of the League of Villains, and we are here today to kill All Might and bring about change in this world where quirks are deemed villainous or unuseful. Seeing how he has not shown up for our little revolution, we will have to make do with all of you, the man with the hands called out in a raspy voice. It seems we need to summon him to his death party. May your wails, cries, and the silence from your death ascend to the sky and summon the symbol of peace. Worry not. Your end will serve the greater good. Kill them all. No, it is not. 13. Get the kids out of here, he called. 1B, follow 13 now. Yes, sensei, his class responded. He could see from the looks on their face that they wanted to go against his orders. He saw Toguru, Izuku, Jiroda, and even Yui hesitate for a second. Yayurazu, Gyro, get the class out of here, Eraserhead shouted. Sensei, there are too many of them for you to fight with your quirk, Ijiro called out. Yay, sensei, let us fight. We aren't scared like the others, Denki joined in. No hero is just a one-trick pony, Kirishima. Now get with the others, or you are expelled, Eraserhead said as he leaped over the railing, followed by Vlad King. The combined class moved towards the exit, the madman's words still lingering in their brains. These villains had not only come to kill All Might but them as well. Many understood that life and death would be part of their world once they graduated, but not in the second week of school. As they were following 13 toward the exit, suddenly, they were surrounded by the dark mist that had heralded the arrival of their attackers. The one known as Kirigiri emerged like a horror movie monster from a portal. You should not run. After all, the young master has gone through great trouble to prepare such delights for all of you. Now be scattered like the dust in the wind, and know that your deaths will bring about a better tomorrow, he said as the mist began to flow from his hand. No, you don't, villain, 13 called out her hand, shooting out the caps on her fingers that controlled her powerful quirk, opening and unleashing it at the villain. Little did she know she was playing right into the villain's trap as a second portal opened behind the hero, redirecting her quirk back at her. 13 screamed as the back of her suit was torn open, flesh ripped from her body, and she fell to her knees. Ijiro leaped forward with a wild haymaker as Toguro came in from the other side, attempting to stab at the mist villain. Their blows passed harmlessly through Kurogiri. "So anxious to die, let me accommodate you foolish children," he said, a portal swallowing the two boys. Ryuko grabbed 13. "Momo, we need medical supplies. Ibara, see if you can restrain him." "There has to be a body somewhere under there," Izuku called out. The girls sprang into action as Sen moved forward, activating his quirk and stripping the mist away, hoping to reveal the body of their target. "He has a heartbeat," Kyoko called out. "Let us see if he withstand my awesome twinkling," Yuga called out as his naval laser fired. Kurogiri was far from done using the portal to redirect the shot at Sen, forcing the boy and a few others to duck. Then portals appeared under many of their feet, causing them to fall in, and they pulled away from their classmates. Ruins zone. Ijiro fell above the ruins. Reaching out, he hardened his hand, attempting to slow his descent by digging into the wall above the alley. As he neared the ground, he released the wall, shifting to his legs to absorb some of the impact. Quickly he scanned the area when the sound of metal on brick drew his attention around the corner. Rushing over to investigate, he saw Toguro pushing off the wall and dive-bombing what appeared to be a villain dressed in rags. It was then that Ijiro saw this thing emerge from a dumpster. As it did, he saw the metal from the can stick to the creature like some makeshift armor. The mass locked eyes with Ijiro and bellowed something, but it was garbled like trying to talk with a mouth of wet peanut butter. But words were not necessary as it charged at the boy. Its massive hand crashed in a thunderous arc, hoping to crush Ijiro in one smash. Toguro impacted the rag man and immediately regretted it as a green noxious gas erupted. He managed not to vomit as he rolled off and tried to move away, his eyes stinging from the stench. Ijiro had unknowingly leaped back to avid his attacker into the noxious gas. His eyes watered as he stumbled farther back, fighting back the vomit. Ijiro managed to get his guard up in time as the metal fist crashed into him, sending him tumbling out of the alley. Toguro kicked off the wall to bypass the cloud that seemed to form a stable ring around Ragman. He rushed towards Ijiro as the boy lost his battle with the noxious stench and vomited into the street. Toguro yanked him to his feet as their attackers shambled out of the alley. He noticed that the rag man was keeping his distance from the armored blob. What caught his attention was when he saw a wisp of smoke stick to the blob. "The blob is avoiding getting too close to Mr. Stinky. We need to force them somehow together," Toguro whispered. "You must do it, as we can't risk you getting stuck. Can you handle that?" Ijiro nodded, quickly scanning the area around. He noticed some broken pieces of wood. It wouldn't keep him entirely out of the cloud, but it would at least add some distance. Grabbing a decent-sized rock, he hurled it, forcing the fog to dodge out of the way as Toguro rushed in the opposite direction to pull the blob's attention to him. Shipwreck zone. Tetsu grunted as the shark villain's mouth came collapsing around his midsection, as it was attempting to swallow his feet first. Thankfully, he had seen him coming and activated his quirk steel, waiting for the last possible second. The clank surprised his attacker, but didn't stop him from trying to bite through. Tetsu knew he couldn't stay like this for long, and he had to free himself and make it to the surface, his lungs already crying out for air. He grit his teeth and reaches out, finding the villain's eyes. Viciously, he dug his fingers into the black orbs. Even underwater, he could hear the thing scream. It released him and yanked away, leaving one of its eyes behind on Tetsu's hand. With no time to contemplate it, he released his quirk and kicked his way to the surface. As he broke the surface, he looked around frantically, where he saw the large boat floating in the middle of the zone. He then saw Huryu, whose hand was inside another villain's mouth. Huryu screamed as the rows of sharp teeth collapsed around his arm, piercing his scales like his other cohorts. This small group of 3 villains had swarmed Huryu when he splashed down. Their diminutive stature of 3'4" had frozen his initial reaction to attack, believing them to be children. But his hesitation ceased when their faces distorted with murderous intent and bore rows of razor-sharp teeth. They seemed to have some piranha quirk as they came at him. His scales had afforded him some protection, but their needle-like teeth had found their way through, having dealt with the other two, forcing one to retreat and the other possibly dead. He was left with what he thought to be the leader. It had dodged his most recent attack with its much more agile state of the fight occurring in the water, leading them to the current state. As the villain shook its head from side to side, attempting to saw off the limb, Hiryu focused and fired his scales with everything he had. Hiryu suppressed his emotion as he saw some of the scales emerge from the back of the thing's head. Its jaw went slack as he pried the thing off him. A shout from behind. He saw Tetsu point toward the boat, and the two began to swim as fast as they could. Suddenly, a green-haired girl appeared at the railing. The two boys recognized her as the Tsu for Class 1A. She dived off the edge as the Denki appeared behind her, yelling to be careful. "Grab Hiryu first. He is injured," Tetsu yelled, swimming with all his might. Tsu nodded, grabbing Hiryu and firing her tongue to grapple the railing and pull them out before she returned, doing the same for Tetsu, but not before delivering a powerful kick to the villain in hot pursuit. The two boys lay panting on the deck. Hiryu tore some fabric from his costume to make improvised bandages, and Tetsu and Tsu moved to help while Denki seemed conflicted. Tsu noticed after making sure the boys had everything in hand. She walked over and roughly yanked his arm, pulling him off to the side. "What the hell is your problem?" she hissed. "Nothing. I wasn't expecting to see 1B, he replied. "Are you fucking kidding me, Hiro?" she said, her eyes widening in shock. "You hesitated to help someone because of some stupid grudge? Either get your head out of your ass or expect to be reported to staff." Bakugo was terrible despite what every head canon Kirishima has. "Are you here to be a hero or an asshole? Let me know so I can start watching my back around you." Denki wanted to retort, but she walked away. Landslide zone. As Shoto fell, he created an ice slide to slow his descent. Rolling to his feet, he looked around as villains emerged from their hiding spots. With a smirk, he slammed his foot into the ground, encasing them all in ice. "Amateurs, now tell me about this plan to kill All Might before hypothermia sets in, and you start losing your extremities," he said. Suddenly, a fist of fire erupted from around a corner. Shoto barely managed to get an ice wall up. The blow still sent him stumbling back. Toru screamed as she emerged from the portal, plummeting to what was sure to be intense pain when the Nido flew up and caught her in his arms. She looked, and it looked like Bondo had thrown him. They impacted roughly. "Sorry for the rough catch, but hold on, I need to turn off this quirk, or we are going to keep rising," he said as he placed his fingers together like Ochako, and they began to descend. "Just hold on. I will reactivate it before we impact." She held on tight as his arm was around her waist. She was highly thankful for the clothing All Might had helped get, so that all her essential bits were at least covered. She looked to the side and saw ice erupt everywhere. That must be Shoto. They landed slightly roughly as Bondo slid down the hill to join them. "Good catch, Monoma," the glue user said. "Nice throw, Bondo," he replied, setting Toru on her feet as they saw fire and ice erupting on the other side of their mountain. "That has to be Shoto," Toru said. "We need to help him." "Of course, madam. That is what heroes do," Nido replied as they dashed off. Mountain zone. Izuku's vision returned with him falling from the sky towards some jagged-looking rocks. Scanning his surround, he saw ice erupting just a short distance from where they were. He felt a hand grab his vest roughly and slow his descent. Looking back, he saw Setsuna's arm. They then noticed her limbs shooting off everywhere, holding Momo and Kyoka and saving them from falling to serious harm. Setsuna was straining, holding them all, Most of her body was with Izuku, while an arm and few legs had flown off to catch the girls from 1A. All their landings were rough, but much softer than they would have been otherwise. She pulled her limbs to herself and fell back on her, but breathing heavily. "Great job, Set. You okay?" Izuku said. "Yay, I just need a minute. Grabbing and holding all of you was a lot," she replied. "Thank you for catching us," Momo said, looking around as a bow staff formed in her hand. "Yay, thanks for the save," Kyoka said as she plunged one of her jacks into the ground and extended the other like a boom mic, closing her eyes. "There are about 15 of them around the bend. They are setting up an ambush. I think some of the voices are too muffled for me to hear. Momo, can I get a baton or something?" Momo nodded and created an eskrima stick, looking at Setsuna. "Baseball bat, please." "Did Izuku teach you how to use those?" Set asked Kyoka. "Some, but it's better than nothing in case they get in close," Kyoka said with a smile. Izuku smiled as he drew his staff. "An ambush only works because of the element of surprise. I say you let me spring their trap. Momo and Kyoka, you come in behind me. Set, can you come in up and over?" "Yeah, I got you, Izu," she said, smiling and taking a swing with her bat. "Then let's go introduce ourselves," he said. Windstorm Zone. Dark Shadow sprang forth, catching the other students after it had gotten Fumi to the ground safely. Koji and Jirota put some strain on the quirk, but it could handle Yui easily. Once all four of them were together, Fumi spoke. "It seems that the forces of evil have sprung a most heinous of traps this day. We must work together to see victory snatched from the jaws of defeat." "I agree," Jirota said. "Strangely put, but well put nonetheless." Yui just nodded, as did Koji. As they emerged from the shelter of the raging wind, if it wasn't for a warning from Dark Shadow that sent the group diving in opposite directions, when a bolt of lightning struck the ground where they were. They looked, and standing on an opposing rooftop, they saw a villain slap its hands together. As he pulled them apart, they saw another lightning bolt forming in their hands. From the streets around them, they saw more villains emerge. "It appears that we are going to have to fight our way out," Jirota said as he removed his glasses, putting them in a case on his belt. "Battle," Yui screamed. Koji flinched. "Fire zone." Sato rolled to the side, avoiding an animated fire dragon as it swooped down. Seeing it circle high into the air, he pushed off in a sprinter's stance, kicking off the ground behind him as he speared the woman in control of the dragon. Quickly, he raised his fist back and drove it into her face, knocking her out. The fire dragon that had been descending rapidly dissipated and disappeared. He didn't have time to celebrate any victory, and the window of the building exploded above him, and he saw a member of Class 1B come diving out. He watched as the boy's speech bubble turned into plop. As he fell to the ground, the word fell, and he landed on it all like he fell into water. Sato shook his head and ran over, helping the boy up. "Thanks," Manga said, looking towards the window he had just dived out of. Rat-a-tat-tat formed, and bullets flew up into the building. "Don't worry, they're rubber," he said as the sounds of pain rang out. Sen and Yuga burst from an alley. Sen spun his arms at whatever was chasing them. The sound of metal colliding with something and a scream of pain was heard. Yuga stepped to the side of Sen and let his naval laser rip down the same alley. "Prend ka," he shouted. The two boys high-fived before they put their hands on their knees, drawing a deep breath. Sen and Manga ran over to them. With a cautious glance down the hall, they saw a giant of a man lying on his back, unconscious against the wall, a burn mark on his forehead, and two dumpsters crushed at his legs. "So, how is everyone doing?" Manga asked sarcastically. "You know, pretty good. A little sad that I forgot the things to make s'mores though," Sato asked, earning a laugh from everyone. A little way away, a building exploded out, and out stepped a woman 18 ft tall. Her hair made of fire burst forth. "Enough games, time to die," Baby heroes. Run, Sen yelled as the boys bolted down another alley. Forest zone. Ibara vines whipped out and yanked Mina back as her acid splashed onto the moss villain's face. Mina spun and fired behind Ibara as a villain with deer antlers came charging, forcing him to change course. Thank you for the save, Ibara called out, her vines forming a wall as arrows flew deeper into the forest. Same to you. We need to get moving. They are surrounding us, and our luck will run out. Mina called back. Suddenly crashing through the trees into the clearing with them came Mizo, two of his hand digging into the eye sockets of a man with a bear quirk, and the other four fighting desperately to keep the bear's jaws from closing on his stomach. Ibara spun to assist her vines, grabbing the thing's arm and wrenching them back with a sickening crack. Mina flung acid at the deer man and Mr. Moss attempting to keep them back. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw another volley of arrows come raining down. Look out, she screamed. She shut her eyes as none of them were in a position to dodge. I got you guys, a voice rang out from the south as Kosai burst out, letting out a massive breath that knocked the arrows off course. The four stood back to back as the villains regained their footing. Together, Ibara said fiercely. The other three nodded. Underground. Ciro's tape flew out, wrapping around the mole man. He tugged with all he could, slamming the beast face down. Recklessly, he charged forward. His foot connected with a villain's thick skull, knocking him out. Ciro stumbled back, blood pouring from a bite mark on his shoulder. Fuck, he muttered. He tenderly reached to his elbow and pulled off a piece of tape to slap over the wound to staunch the bleeding. As he stumbled out of the large cave back into a tunnel, he stuck his hand against the wall to guide him. The sounds of a battle began to fill his ears as he entered a large chamber. With her back against the wall, Kinoko threw her arm sweepingly toward her opponents. They appeared to be twins with a spider quirk, huge mandibles protruding from their mouths, dripping with salvia, and spider talons growing out of their backs. They chuckled as they approached the girl. Suddenly, they began to scream as the spore grew into a strange mushroom, and green gas leaked. Kinoko let out a battle cry and ran, delivering a layout dropkick on one of the twins. The other, still screaming Talon, lashed out. Ciro fired his tape, capturing the limb and yanking back with all his might. A sickening crack was heard as the stem snapped. Shihai appeared in the darkness above the beast and dropped down, driving his feet into the thing's back and face into the ground. He and Kinoko scrambled free as Ciro ran over, firing more tape to secure them to the floor. The three looked at each other. A terrible roar was heard from the west tunnel before any of them could speak. Having emerged from the south, the only other exit was east. They broke off in a run. The front door. Ochako raced towards the down 13, her quirk being used against her by the mist villain. The villain chuckled menacingly, but it was suddenly jerked to the side before it could act. Stay away from them, you monster, Ryuko yelled. There is a body under there. Juzo stick him. Pony aim for the neck brace. I'd kick that son of a bitch into next week. Yosu, I need a bat or something, Nyaranjeki called out. Class 1B immediately sprang into action, putting their faith in their classmate. Juzo ran, sliding to a stop in front of the mist villain. His hands hit the floor, and the villain began to sink. Pony's horns fired, striking true, and a scream of pain told them they were on the right path. Ida sprang forward and kicked the villain on the left side, sending him toppling. Its hand shoots out to stop in and becomes trapped in the floor like its feet. Yostis handed over a makeshift bat to Nyaranjeki. Uraraka, negate me, he yelled as he ran by her. She reached out, managing to slap his arm. He leaped into the air, raising the pipe above his head. Release it, he yelled. Ochako pressed her fingertips together, allowing gravity to reassert itself, and he came crashing down with a thunderous overhead swing. A terrible clang was heard as it collided with the mist villain's neck brace, driving the villain to the ground. Juzo release. Yostsu weld this bastard, Nyan yelled, leaping off the mist villain. Juzo released as softening the ground hardening around the villain as Yostsu ran forward and welded the neck brace to the floor. Ida and Pony kick that bastard till he stops moving, he yelled. He ran over to Ochako, pulling some bandages from a pouch. Use this to stop the bleeding. That was amazing, Ochako said, applying the bandages. Thanks. Now we need to figure a way out past those doors. I can get past them, Juzo said. Softening should work so we can pry them open, and then Speedy can get help. While I would loathe to leave my companions behind, I see the logic in sending me, Tenya said. Why are we talking about it? Let's do this, Yostu yelled as they raced to the doors. Ruins zone. The blob whirled and threw a dangerous sweeping backhand with the speed that betrayed the thing's mass. Toguro rolled a blade forming from his elbow. It bit deeply into the mass, and he heard what he thought was a roar. Maybe it was a scream, as the blade hit something solid momentarily before slicing through. As the appendage fell to the ground, a sickening splash sound was heard as everything around it just liquefied, revealing a severed hand, cut just above the wrist, blood flowing and seeping from it. It has bones underneath. There is a skeleton beneath. Toguro whirled to face the blob. A wicked smirk played across his face. That means there is a head somewhere in there. I wonder if you can function without it. Ijiro bobbed and weaved, took a deep breath as he dashed in, coming to a sliding stop in the noxious cloud, and swinging his makeshift bat with all his might. He was rewarded with a satisfying thunk and a grunt as the rag man tumbled away. Taking another breath, he pressed his advantage and swung for the rag man's head. But the villain was able to duck under, grabbing Ijiro around his waist before taking his back. Can't hold your breath forever, little boy, his sickly voice dripped out. Let me in. Elsewhere ruins zone. Duck, Ijiro yelled as he leaped over Itsuka with a spin, his tail crashing down on some villain with boar tusks. The villain's head slammed into the ground, a tusk shattered, but he didn't move as he was out like a light. Itsuka whirled, enlarging her hand and grabbing a girl with centrifugal fire rings dancing around her. Itsuka grunted at the pain as she tossed the girl upwards into the ceiling. The girl grunted in pain as she impacted as gravity pulled her back. Itsuka leaped into the air, and with an enlarged palm, volleyball spiking her into the ground. A follow-up kick to the head knocked the villain out. Ojiro whirled around at the sound of the wall crashing inward as a short man, about 4'6", but built like a fucking house, bulldozed into the room. Unlike other villains they had encountered, this one appeared to be wearing an actual costume of sorts. His skin was a blue-black that had a metallic shine to it. His head was flat and tapered back into a point into his muscular neck. Gold cargo pants attached to matching suspenders that had various pouches attached. Itsuka turned and threw a hard straight toward the new arrival. The villain ducked its head, and a metallic clang echoed from the impact as Itsuka howled in pain. Before she could grab her hand, the villain speared her out the side of the building. Ojiro went to chase after them when a sudden kick landed on the back of his leg, followed by an elbow back to his head, sending him crashing down. Thankfully, though painful, it didn't knock him out. He rolled and got to his feet. Standing before him was a very pretty woman with honey-brown hair and golden eyes. She wore white skin-tight pants with gold boots, gloves, and a tight tank top. Now, darling, you get to dance with me, she purred. Ojiro performed a kip-up and immediately attacked. She slid past or under his attacks, moving just out of reach. She then countered him with stinging quick hits that sent him stumbling back. Tesk, she said. Surely you can do better than that? Shipwreck zone. Denki saw Huryu getting to his feet. He stumbled a little as the silver-haired boy held him steady. Thank you for the save, Usui, Huryu said. Huryu and Tetsu, he said, gesturing between them. You can call me Tsu, she said. That's Denki over there. She turned and looked at him, glaring at him. We need to figure a way out of here. Those villains aren't going to stay in the water forever. I agree. But fighting them in the water seems akin to suicide. They are more agile than us, Hiryu said, touching his bandages. I can't use my quirk, except for defense if they come to bite me, Tetsu said. Turning to metal makes me heavy so I sink well. But that is about it. All they have to do is drag me down and wait. Some help, Denki muttered. I'm sorry I hadn't heard your quirk yet, Hiryu said, trying to keep his voice friendly. Electricity, I can fry all of them, Denki said. Well, shit, that's useful. Fry them up, and we can all swim to shore, Tetsu smiled. If I produce too big of a charge, then my brain short circuits. If I produce too small of a charge, then when I am in the water, if I have to again, I will probably fry all of us, Denki said, feeling annoyed he couldn't just be the hero and rub it in their faces. Sue, how far can you jump? Hiryu asked. I might be able to make it to shore unencumbered, she said curiously before she snapped her fingers. Denki fries them. I snatch him out, get him and Tetsu to shore, and come back for you. Exactly, Hiryu said. If anything is still moving after Denki shocks them to hell, I should be able to defend myself till you return for me. What do you say you want to destroy all the villains for us? I think I would, Denki said, smiling. The last thing the villains in the lake saw was a blonde-haired boy leaping off the edge, laughing manically. Landslide zone. Shoto stumbled to the side, confident his ice had done the job. He noticed, just past his ice, that the other ice was more white than his with a darker blue tinge. He saw the burst of light from behind it as the rampaging beast made of fire exploded, sending him diving to the side. As he scrambled to his feet, a girl burst through the hole, her arm encased in ice. Her eyes were a majestic blue that matched her braided hair. He brought up an ice wall to deflect the blow. But while his attention was diverted, a flaming fist hit him from the side, sending him crashing into the rocks behind him. His vision blurred as he saw a boy who looked just like the girl, but with red eyes and hair. They were twins. Poor little ice user, prepare to die, the boy sneered. Shoto slammed his fist into the ground, sending a wave of spikes at him. The girl spun in front of her sibling, arms spread out to take the blow. Shoto tried to pull the spikes back and watched in horror as they crashed into the girl. Shoto heard their impact, but instead of seeing blood fly, he saw the girl standing there, but her whole body seemed made of white ice with a blue tinge. Shoto watched as she burst forward, tackling him to the ground. It was like being hit by a solid brick. The air was forced out of his body as he collided with the rocks again, then spider webbing. She reared to drive an elbow into his head when a metal body came rocketing from the hill, tackling her into the dirt. Shiva! The boy yelled as a rock floated up behind him and crashed into the back of his head, diving him to the ground. Shoto saw him jerk around awkwardly and claw at his neck like he was being choked. Toru had a rear choke locked in tight, trying to put the boy to sleep when suddenly she screamed as he erupted into flames. She kicked him off of him and scrambled away as she felt her skin blistering all over her body. A metal Nido leaped free as Bondo appeared over the hill and started firing glue into the whole Shiva that had been knocked into by Nido's attack. They couldn't see Toru, but all they could hear were her screams from behind the now flaming villain. Shoto stepped forward and sent a glacier toward the villain. He saw the fire-covered boy brace, and his fire roared hotter as the ice melted before making an impact. An orb of ice erupted out of the crater, pushing the glue everywhere. The woman came rising out on a pillar of ice. Shoto felt his fireside flare some before he pushed it back. No, he would win with only his mother's fire and show them all. Naito ran, grabbed Shoto's hand quickly, and then froze briefly. You have two quirks? You have fire and ice. Why are you using only one? What? Bondo yelled. I will prove I am the best with only my ice, Shoto spat back. That is the dumbest fucking thing I have ever heard. And I share a class with a quirkless kid. Remember that, Naito said. Fine, you take Fire Boy while I deal with Ice Girl. Once he takes out the Fire Boy, get him secure. We need to find Toru. You got it, Nito, Bondo said. Think you can push us through those flames? He told Shoto. I will show you, he growled back. He stomped his foot, and fucking huge glacier erupted underneath the flames, knocking to fire the villain back. Shiva spun and tried to move toward her brother, only for a firewall to erupt before her. She whirled and saw Nito smiling, his right side flaming, while an ice ball formed on his left hand. Better worry about yourself, bitch. Mountain Zone. The first villain leaped from the cover as Izuku came into view. With some of the others following suit, he was intercepted, but a bludgeoning blow from Izuku's staff crashed into the villain's ribcage. He crashed off to the side. As he looked up, 2 earphone jacks plunged into his ears, and the deafening sound erupted, knocking him out and shattering his eardrums. Another villain, whose arms were morphed into swords, met the pointy end of Izuku's staff, and he used the villain's momentum to carry him overhead and crash behind him. Momo quickly jammed her staff into the back of the villain's head, bouncing it off the ground and him into unconsciousness. One of the villains aimed by making their hand into a finger gun shape, but before he could fire, a metal bat crashed into the back of his head, plunging him into darkness. No cheap shots from you, Set cried out. Izuku spun back to the next opponent, only to have to dodge to the side as the blade came crashing down. The girl who swung it smiled as she reversed her grip and ripped back up, forcing Izuku to dodge again. Her next attack went for his gut. He could deflect it before he drove the sharp part of the staff into the woman's foot, pinning her to the ground. She screamed as his fist found her face in a quick combination, knocking her out. Momo spun past Izuku, bringing a leaping strike crashing down upon a man with a serpent head that was about to strike. With lightning speed, she came in with a side strike to the villain's rib cage, then his knee, driving him down. She stepped in and brought the staff up. A sickening crack was heard as it crashed clean under the villain's chin, sending him sprawling backward. Another villain let off a war cry as they came jumping from a high vantage point. They reared their fist back as this black and yellow energy began to form around their hand and arm. Suddenly, a hand grabbed them by the collar and jerked backward, causing them to crash head first into the rocks. Kyoka managed to dodge a clumsy swipe from an attacker with claws from her hands. She remembered what Izuku had shown her and swung an eskrima stick into her attacker's gut, doubling over before spinning and driving it upward under the chin, similar to Momo's strike with equal results. Setsuna had another villain being choked out by her legs as another met the business end of her baseball bat. With her head floating above, she could shout out a warning for Momo, who could duck as a huge rock flew past her. Turning, Momo saw a man take a stance like a Shaolin monk. She engaged, bringing her staff in a side attack. She saw the villain's foot hit the ground, and a pole of earth shot up, blocking the attack. Momo spun to keep the attack up, and another bar emerged, blocking the next attack. Before Momo could redirect, one shot out at an angle, catching her in the gut, knocking the wind out of her, and driving her to a knee. Another pole came springing for her head. As she brought her arm up, a metal buckler shield appeared, deflecting it. Kyoka plugged her jacks into her boot speakers and unleashed her heat beat at the villain, disrupting his control and causing the poles to crumble. She cut the attack as Izuku raced past her, driving his knee into the man's face and quickly hitting the villain in the temple, knocking them out. Izuku barely had time to react as a man with a bull head came and speared him, one of its horns managing to piece his armor. Kyoka called his name as the knife flew out from behind the cover and lodged in her shoulder blade. Momo deflected another flying knife and pulled Kyoka to cover behind a boulder. A warning shout from Set allowed Momo to spin and deflect the blade again. Momo watched as the blade tumbled, righted itself, and came back at her. Kyoka screamed as the blade in her shoulder wrenched free and spun, slicing Momo across the back. Set dived in and tackled Momo to the side as she had been left open, and the descending blade was diving for her stomach. Instead, it found Set's floating hand. Set bit back a cry of pain as she wrestled with the knife, pushing up the blade till she could grab it by the hilt. Izuku grabbed the bull by the horn and yanked it to the side, crashing it into the ground. He felt the beast's jaws clamp down on his leg. He screamed as a blade found its way to his hand and plunged into the monster's eye. The thing roared and reared back. Izuku summoned the black sword to his hand as he thrust upward. It pierced through the beast's jaw and brain. The massive blade killed it instantly. Izuku moved from under the collapsing carcass, quickly assessed his leg, and wrapped it to stem the bleeding. Kyoka put her jacks into the ground and located their attacker. She saw a rock above them. Dashing out, she directed her sonic attack at the ledge above their attacker. Pushing her quirk as hard as she could, she saw the rocks collapse and heard the scream of pain as the knives fell to the ground. Set's head was suddenly engulfed in a cloud of dust, blinding her. She immediately pulled her head towards the rest of her body. She felt something hard crash into her jaw, a small ball bearing the culprit. Thankfully, her jaw wasn't broken. Then she saw her attacker. A girl came out holding an empty slingshot, and that same metal bearing appeared, and she fired off again, the cloud forming around Set's head again. She narrowly dodged another hit. Momo scanned around and saw a man's head sticking out from behind a rock. His hand was extended as he seemed to be controlling the cloud. She created a flash bang and tossed it, shouting, "Kyo, ears!" Kyoka heard the call and immediately covered her ears. The grenade exploded directly above the man, sending him tumbling from his concealment. Momo ran forward, her ears still ringing, and leaped, driving the buckler into the man's back. He screamed, and Momo quickly slipped her other arm under his chin and choked him out. Set went after the slingshot. Another bearing came flying. Set split her body as far as she dared, corkscrewing around the shot before a swirling typhoon of body parts engulfed the villain. Blows rang down, driving Slingshot down, till a solid fist connected with Slingshot's jaw and jerked the head for a clean knockout blow. Set pulled herself together and stumbled quickly, pulling cuffs from her belt and securing the villain. Izuku stumbled back to his comrades holding his side. He saw Momo producing cuffs as Kyoka and Set secured the villains. The slow clap caught their attention, and from around the corner came a man in a ninja suit with a katana on his hip. He moved low, his eyes darting between them all. The one clapping was the huge spider quirk of a man, his spider limbs carrying him above the ground, while the two above his head sprouted vicious talons that dripped a black substance that hissed as it struck the ground. He smiled wickedly as he looked at the students. "Now, children, let's play a game. How long till you beg for death?" Windstorm Zone. Yui ran forward as a pair of cackling villains ran at her. Reaching into her belt, she threw some small items. The laughing duo ignored the toys being flung at them. At the last second, Yui activated her quirk, and 55-gallon metal drums crashed into them. Yui grinned wickedly as reaching into another pouch to police nightsticks came to life in her hands. With a savage laugh and uncanny aim, she descended on her attackers, quickly becoming the victims as she broke one's jaw before jabbing them in the throat, cutting off their scream, and the third strike crashed into the side of the villain's head, sending them down in a crumpled heap. The second managed to get to their feet and turned to flee. "Don't run," Yui called out as she hurled one of her weapons, sending them down in a heap. She pounced with the nightstick across her forearm, driving it into the villain's spine. He screamed as she spun like a cat, and the nightstick was across the man's throat. She reared back, choking the villain into unconsciousness. The boys were stunned, as were some of the villains, and they heard her tell the villain to laugh for me. "Come on, laugh." A broad man with animal tattoos all over his body charged out at Yui. Jiroda roared and speared the man out of his shoes. A snake tattoo suddenly sprang to life, wrapping around Jiroda. The beast user screamed, trying to grab the snake when it suddenly stopped attacking him and struck out and bit another villain that was coming up at Jiroda's back, with these jagged metal spikes sticking out of his forearms. Koji smiled as the snake struck the backstabber again and again. Jiroda turned back to the tattooed man and started slamming his head off the ground till he stopped moving. He looked up, roaring at the other villains, and charged into their midst. Fumi ran out, and Dark Shadow roared to life, lancing towards the lightning wielder. A huge flash exploded from the rooftop, causing Dark Shadow to recoil as the man hurled a massive bolt at the sentient creature, driving it back more. Koji looked around the area and smiled. Yui, cackling with glee, ran over to Fumi as a woman came running at him with a knife. Yui batted the weapon out of the woman's hands before she crashed the nightstick into the woman's knees, shattering them. When the woman screamed, the world started to wobble and distort. Yui and Fumi grabbed at their heads till a blind shot from Yui cracked the woman across the skull, silencing her. A lightning blast came crashing down, sending them flying as the villain on the roof cackled in glee. Jiroda was surrounded as quirks and weapons lashed out at him. He roared in anger, his size increasing, and then he grabbed hold of an unfortunate soul that lingered too close. Jiroda could snatch the man by a leg and swing him like a club into his companions. Screams filled the air even louder than the howling winds. The lightning villain reared back, another massive bolt forming his hands as he shouted, "Die, hero scum!" Before he could fire, a swarm of rats burst out and swarmed the villain. He screamed as they tore into his flesh. He screamed as they toppled from the roof. And he stopped screaming when he hit the pavement 5 stories below. Yui, Fumi, and Dark Shadow struggled to their feet. They didn't have time to question what was happening as they saw the crowd growing bigger around Jiroda. "Battle!" they yelled as they charged in. Fire zone. The boys dived to the side as the fire giant whipped her hair, lancing out like whips crashing into the ground around them. Yuga rolled and came up firing, and the blast hit the woman in the stomach. It appeared to cause minimal damage as it glared at the boy. Manga got to his feet. "Cover me," he yelled. Sen took a defensive position in front of his classmate as more fire hair lashed out. He activated his quirk, knocking them off course. Sato pulled Yuga to out of harm's way. Quickly he looked around and spotted a large spool of wire lying near a downed power line. "Yuga, have you ever seen Star Wars?" he yelled. "By and sewer," the boy replied. "Of course." "Let's snow speeder that bitch," he yelled. They got to their feet and dashed forward. A giant word bubble formed above the villain. Sploosh. Water fell out as it crashed over her head, putting her hair out. Sato tossed one end of the wire to Yuga, who grabbed it as they began to race in circles around the woman's legs. Manga stumbled forward as more word bubbles appeared around the woman. Boom, boom, boom. Explosions staggered the woman as Sen raced behind their attacker. Spying an abandoned vehicle, he broke the window and disengaged the parking race to the back of it as Manga ran and jumped into the driver's seat. Ramming speed, Sen roared as he activated his quirk, launching the vehicle forward. Sato and Yuga dived to the side as the car crashed into the back of the woman's legs, sending her crashing to the ground, temporarily stunning the villain. They used the wire to try and bind her legs to make it difficult for her to stand. Sato then muscled the woman's arms behind her back. Manga stepped forward as 2 word bubbles of click, 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 click formed and floated around the woman's wrists, turning into giant-sized handcuffs. As the woman struggled, Manga activated his quirk again, and with a plonk, crashing into her head, she was knocked out. "So I was thinking that after we get out of here, if you guys are down, we should all hit the arcade or something," Sato said with a smile. "You got it," Sen responded. Forest zone. Mina screamed as one of the antlers pierced her side. She reached out and dropped a thick coat of acid on them. But the villains drove forward, pulling her father away from her group. Ibara spun at the sound of Mina's scream. She desperately sent out a lasso to grab the deer man's ankles as the rest of her vines were wrapped around the bear, desperately trying to pull it back as its jaws were coming down around Kosai's neck. "Stop for all that is holy, please stop," she screamed. "Don't make me do this." Kosai frantically pulled in a breath and blew it into the villain's mouth, forming a wedge and cutting off the villain's air. The bear pulled back, allowing Kosai to scramble free, but with its one good claw, it managed to stab the boy through the stomach. Tears started to fall from Ibara as her vines went around the villain's neck. The bear wrenched his arm free, and Kosai's blood and intestines came with it. Ibara could see the blood and hear Kosai scream as her vines tightened around the villain's neck. She wrenched them violently backward, snapping the villain's head back into an unnatural angle. Kosai frantically grabbed his insides, pulling them back. Shock quickly sat in as Ibara slid beside him. Her tears poured forth as she ripped the bottom portion of her dress to bind his stomach. Mizo heard the screams from his companions as he ripped the moss from his face. His multiple arms sprung free, and he began to take the moss away from the villain's body frantically. He felt arrows pierce his legs and back, but he didn't stop. Instead, a single arm bent back and snapped the shafts. The moss villain desperately tried to bind the boy's arms, but they couldn't keep up. With every rip of moss, the villain would scream. Mizo was skinning the villain alive. Mina's acid did its job as the antler tumbled free, with her along with it. She rolled on the ground as the deer man pivoted and charged again. As the villain closed the distance, it attempted to swipe and impale Mina with its other antler, dropped into the splits underneath the attack, but drove the antler that she had pulled free up directly into the man's lower jaw. Mina grits her teeth and shoves up with all her might. Her eyes closed. She felt it break through something and slide further. When the villain toppled to the side, it twitched violently as the antler was now lodged in its brain. Mina stumbled forward, retching off to the side. As she burst out of the underbrush, she saw a woman standing in an opening, reaching back like drawing a bow and arrows forming. Mina rushed out, tackling the woman to the ground, and she quickly threw acid into the villain's eyes, blinding her. The woman's screams echoed into the air. Mina took a mount position and started driving her elbow into the woman's face until she stopped screaming or moving. Underground. The trio leaped to the sides as they hit another chamber, the huge white maggot creature nipping at their heels. It exploded into the room as small bipedal things broke free and ran towards the students, its mouth agape and saliva flowing free. Zero sidestepped one as he fired his tape-binding one, and using all his strength, he wanked and threw the thing. It crashed into some of its compatriots, but when it hit the wall, it splattered, and green blood spayed against the wall. The scene froze Zero, but it did not freeze his attackers. One dived wildly and grabbed onto his leg. In one deft motion, it was a bit deep, tearing out a chunk of flesh and meat. Kanoko pushed herself up and threw out spores attached to her attackers. She quickly activated her quirk, and the mushrooms sprang forward and exploded in a burst of hot liquid that started dissolving the maggot bodies on contact. She smiled, just like hot liquid and salt were their enemies. Shihai ducked into the black to escape his attackers and appeared beside Zero, pulling him away from another attack. Shihai kicked another away as Zero fired some more tape to bind a few more. It was the maniacal laughter as spores started covering the main body of the monster maggot that had chased them. "Fire in the hole," they heard Kanoko yell. The boys dived for their lives as the explosions rocked the underground. When everything cleared, they could hear some screams of pain as they saw 5 identical albinos in the exploded-out husk of the maggot. Shihai immediately dropped through the black and came up swinging on the villains. Zero hobbled over, grabbed a rock, attached it to the end of the tape like a flail, and beat them into unconsciousness. Kinko found the boys securing the villains. With a grin, she said, "Mushrooms are the best." The front door. Once the doors were softened, It was child's play for Rico to pull them up, allowing a reluctant Ida to take off for reinforcements. Kurogiri regained consciousness in time to see the speedster disappearing. With a yell, he created a portal underneath him, dropping him away from the students who had defeated him. "He has escaped," Pony yelled. A portal opened again before the students and villains came pouring out. Nyanjaki ran forward with this makeshift bat. "One me people, Ochako, get 13 through those doors and out of harm's way. Then please help us deal with these uninvited guests. Let's show these scum suckers what happens when the fuck with UA." Ochako ran and set 13 down in a side room away from the battle. She loathed to leave her hero, but needed to return to the battle. Ida had already run down the hall, so hopefully, rescuers would be inbound. She spotted a duffel bag labeled emergency. She opened it and saw medical supplies and a red box containing a flare gun. She was about to grab the bag and leave when something caught her attention. A shimmer in the air. I caused her to freeze. Panic flooded her mind. She carefully reached back and touched the desk, removing its gravity. She saw the shimmer again, grabbed the desk, and threw it. When she heard it collide with something, she immediately pounced. She knew it wasn't Toru because she didn't leave a shimmer or anything to announce her presence. She could grab a hold of some limb, but it felt rough and scaly under her. It writhed in her grasp, trying to break free. She attempted to keep hold of the limb and swung with all she could, trying to land blows. Grunts and yells of pain rewarded her efforts. When suddenly some slashed across her stomach, ripping her costume and drawing blood, Ochako stumbled away. She was between whatever this villain was and the door. She quickly closed it. She couldn't let this thing get away. "Foolish little girl. I was just supposed to dispose of 13. But now I have to dispose of you as well," a voice rasped. Ochako's heart felt like it wanted to beat out of her chest. She was terrified. But she knew she couldn't leave 13 defenseless. And what if this thing attacked her classmates from behind? "You are welcome to try," she spat back. It may have been false bravado, but she wasn't about to sacrifice others to save her own life. She saw the shimmer, but it moved too fast for her to react. Something smacked her hard in the gut, driving all the wind from her as she collided with the wall. Her eyes teared as she saw the shimmer scamper past her and head towards 13. Desperately, Ochako leaped towards where she guessed the thing was. She landed and swung desperately, unsure where she was landing, as the thing seemed to collapse under her weight. She felt like she had a surge of hope. Something was wrapped around her neck and tossed her back. She couldn't even scream. Everything went fuzzy as she saw the simmer descending upon her. She rolled to the side to avoid a strike. She twisted and threw a kick. It felt like it landed, but she couldn't know the damage. As she scrambled to her feet, she felt something rake her leg, drawing blood. She grabbed the emergency bag and swung it with all she could. She was rewarded with a scream of pain. She saw the red case and scrambled for it, as she felt the villain grab her leg and pull her back, flying over the top of her. She reached and grabbed what she guessed was the tail, activating her quirk. She yanked back and threw the villain. Pressing her fingers together, she deactivated her quirk and dove for the case, pulling out the flare. She loaded the flare gun and rolled onto her back. The villain's camouflage had dropped. They had what appeared to be some lizard quirk. It gave them the appearance of a gecko. One of their eyes was damaged, and they barely seemed to see out of it. Blood dripped from its mouth. Its mouth opened as it flew through the air, revealing rows of sharp needle-like teeth. She fired. As it entered the mouth of the villain, it ignited. The muffled and guttural scream would haunt her nightmares. The villain got to their feet, clawing at their own throat, ripping flesh and scale to get the thing out. Unthinkingly, they ran into the walls, thrashing wildly until they were rolling on the ground. The thrashing soon slowed and stopped. Ochako retched violently off to the side. She got to her feet, the flare gun still in her hand. She reloaded and put the spare flares in a pouch at her side. She paused to wipe the tears from her eyes. The only thought that allowed her to push on was, "It was him or me. It was him or me." She kept repeating it as she threw open the door and raced to rejoin the battle. The front door. The villains were not ready for the sudden assault from the students. Nirnjeki led the initial charge. Swinging his makeshift bat, he aimed for knees and ribs. Yosu came in at his side with a shield and baton he had made. Ryuko grabbed the ones she could and flung them away as Pony's horns hit the back lines, sowing further chaos. "Ready!" Juzo yelled. Ryuko strained as she grabbed the boys and yanked them back, falling to a knee. Once they were clear, Juzo activated his quirk, as did Nirn. The ground softened, and the struck areas were hit again from the twin impact. Screams filled the area as knees shattered, as did ribs and sternums. Hope filled their hearts seeing the villains trapped or disabled. But something landed before them. The plaza. Vlad King and Eraserhead landed ready for battle. The two teachers, though they may not have seen eye to eye on certain things, had done extensive training together. Vlad King took the lead, his quirk coming to life as the villain's front line charged forward. Eraserhead stepped to the side, negating the lead assailant's quirk as Vlad King's fist came crashing in with a vicious uppercut that launched the man back into his allies. Vlad King didn't stop. He grabbed one of the fallen and yanked him up to his feet, using him as a shield from the range volley that came crashing down. Eraserhead deftly dodged past the front line, leaving them to Vlad King as he engaged the back line. Shigaraki smiled behind the hand covering his face, watching the two teachers deal with the nameless cannon fodder he had sent after them. He had hoped they would fare better, but he wasn't surprised at how, with a slight bit of resistance they were encountering, they were starting to crumble and panic. He thought of issuing them commands. If they would listen, he was leading the raid after all. But he watched as they fell. The hope he knew was being built up would soon crumble. The actual raid members were to ensure the rest of the mobs met their end. He watched as they worked like a well-oiled machine. They couldn't avoid every attack that came at them, but they were covering for each other's weaknesses as best they could. It was too bad that they were ingrained into the problem. He could see uses for them. He smiled, watching them wade into the fodder, thinking they were buying time for the students to escape, not knowing they had been scattered to their deaths. He would leave them alive so that they could realize how futile their resistance was. "Namu, see what happened to Kurogiri. Bring him to me, and deal with whoever is up there," Shigaraki ordered. The beast leaped off. Ruins zone. Ijiro struggled to get the rag man off his back, but the man had a vice-like grip. Ijiro activated his quirk, focusing on his neck, head, and back. He made sure he had a secure hold of the rag man's legs and leaped up, going back. The rag man gasped in pain as his body was sandwiched between the pavement and a hardened Ijiro. He released his grip, allowing Ijiro to reverse position. Unfortunately, he inhaled some of the gas. He held back the bile that began to collect in his throat as he shifted the hardening from his back to his elbow and dropped it down as hard as he could, bouncing the rag man's head off the concrete with a sickening crack. The villain's body went limp as he scrambled off and out of the cloud. Once clear, all he could do was vomit the acid in his stomach. It burned his throat and esophagus as it escaped. Toguro focused his attacks toward the outer layers of the blob. Despite the threat of the villain and removing his head, he knew that was a last resort. He was disgusted that he had chopped off the villain's hand, but he would have to deal with that later. There was a theory that he needed to figure out, and he was able to test it quickly. With a precision that came from a lifetime of wielding blades, he could cut off small layers from the villain. When the villain didn't react, he summarized that at least by doing so, he wasn't skinning him. But that brought up a new problem. How would he win without immediately resorting to lethal tactics? He knew there was a body under there that he could cut, but he couldn't shift to the flat of his blade for his attacks, as they wouldn't penetrate the outer layers. He was going to have to play a dangerous game. Cut but not cut through. He ducked under an attack and swung for the midsection. He did his best to focus on the feeling of the blade passing through the outer layers. As soon as it encountered something he felt was different, he would spin past, pulling the blade out in a slashing motion. Now he knew that this could lead to still killing the villain, as it was possible they would bleed out, as he had no way of knowing the depth of his attacks. And even if he did, cutting someone with a sword in the middle of a battle was tricky. When he saw blood seeping with the ooze, he knew some of his attacks had landed home. The blob was not going down gently, though it was panicking, understandably, since losing its hand. In its panic, it didn't see its unconscious ally flying toward them cold. As the stink cloud from Ragman permitted the blob, Toguru moved back. As the sludge started to melt away, the Ragman fell to the ground as the villain's true form was revealed. They were sickly thin, with stringy white hair, as they tumbled out of their protective sludge, retching violently. Once they moved toward the edge of the cloud, Toguru ran and kicked them free of the cloud completely. They couldn't even recover as the vomiting continued. But Toguru came from behind, and with the flat of the blade, he crashed it into the side of their head, knocking them out. Idro cautiously moved forward, seeing that both villains were down for the count. But he nearly vomited again, seeing the blob was missing a hand. He watched Toguru move quickly, pulling out various first aid items to stem the blood loss. Ijiro paused. He wasn't a fan of Izuku, nor of 1B, as his irrational mind felt it was all some sort of power play. But he saw the boy working feverishly to save the villain that had just been trying to kill them. He pulled out what first aid he had and knelt next to him. "What can I do to help?" he asked. Toguru gave him a grateful smile and directed him to tend the cuts he hadn't addressed yet. Ruins zone. Itsuka came crashing down to the ground below. She pushed off the villain who had speared her out of the building. She twisted in the air and rebounded off the far wall. She reached out and grabbed the fire escape on her way down. The force was too much. It yanked her arm out of its socket, and she screamed and fell to the ground. The wind was forced out of her lungs. She rolled and struggled to reach her feet as the villain landed with a thud, leaving a small crater. They were on their feet and ready for battle. She was done. She knew it. One hand was broken, and the other arm hung at her side, separated from its socket. She rose to her feet, ready to make her last stand. "Pop it back in," the villain said. Itsuka froze. "I am coming over there. Now pop that shoulder back in and show me what you can do." Itsuka took the opportunity to pop her shoulder back in. She didn't give him the satisfaction of screaming. Once done, she took a fighting stance. "Give me a good fight now," he said as she rushed in. Itsuka feinted another head strike and saw him do the same maneuver where he ducked his head. She ducked down and spun to kick the villain's legs instead of sending him sprawling. She turned and leaped towards the villain's unprotected back. She was surprised when he tilted forward onto his head and flipped onto his feet. He spun and landed a kick to her midsection, driving her back. He smiled as he came in. She tilted back from the right cross and landed a bicycle kick to the villain's jaw. She landed and pushed off in an attempt to spear the villain. But he was ready for her attack. He planted a foot in the ground, brought a knee to land in her chest, and his arms wrapped around her. He spun and threw her away. Ojiro was getting frustrated and desperate. He couldn't land a hit. With every strike he attempted, she would dodge and land a stinging counterattack. He was thankful she wasn't stronger than she was, but she knew how to strike. Numerous cuts had opened up. Even when he grabbed her, she could slip out and land another strike, sending him to the ground. He got frustrated and went all in. Again, she was slipping past every punch and kick he threw. But on his last swing, he incorporated his tail into the attack, and it landed. She had slipped past the final attack, but could not dodge his tail fully. It was amazing that she was even able to escape some of it in the first place. Her grunt of pain might have been the sweetest sound to grace his ears his whole life. He was renewed and ready to fight when he looked into her eyes. He worried. There was no fear in her eyes, no stress. Instead, they began to twinkle almost as if in delight. Shipwreck Zone. Tetsu was watching Denki, who had fried all the villains in the lake as far as they could tell. Tsu had asked Tetsu as they made it to shore, "Do you think he got them all? If any of them are still in there, then they ain't happy." His reply was greeted with a laugh that helped to calm them both as she leaped back into the water to retrieve Huryu. He watched as they came ashore. Huryu and she came to shore. Huryu told him to keep watching Denki as he and Tsu moved through the overgrown grass towards the sound of the fighting to see what was happening. They all froze when they saw the massive creature next to the seemingly main villain leap from its master's side and head toward the front doors. Huryu and Tsu watched as they saw their teachers fighting through the crowd of villains. They could feel the hope building as their teachers were working with such precision as they fought together. The Shigaraki joined the fight. A villain was wrapped inside Aizawa's capture scarf. The class 1 teacher spun and threw him at the villain. Tsu and Huryu watched in horror as the villain caught his ally, and he disintegrated him. He couldn't even scream. The ashes just caught in the wind and blew away. They saw the wicked grin as he raced into the fight. He said nothing as he first engaged. They saw him kick other villains towards the duo to create openings for himself. Then they heard his voice. 20, 17, 16, 16, 15. You're slowing down there, Eraserhead. The last part was spat out like it was toxic for the villain to say. The underground hero didn't respond. Instead, he slipped past another attack by one of the hordes. He grabbed the back of his clothes and threw them toward the feet of Shigaraki. The villain leaped over the attack, which was what the pro hero wanted. He threw his capture scarf, entangled around the villain's legs. With a quick yank, he brought the villain to the ground. Eraserhead closed the distance instantly. He saw Shigaraki go to use his quirk on his scarf, and he quickly negated the villain's quirk. The shock froze the villain like it did to most. He fought when their quirk suddenly didn't work. He reared back and landed a violent soccer kick to the villain's head. Shigaraki's head snapped back from the blow, teeth, blood, and the hand covering his face went flying. They saw panic in the villain's eyes. The cockiness and menace that was there before seemed to be gone. They saw Eraserhead go for a finishing blow, only for Shigaraki to dodge the punch to his face. A hand of dirt flew into their teacher's face. He then reached down and touched the scarf, destroying it. As the teacher was stunned, Shigaraki, with his legs now free, spun, pushing up with one arm, and landed a solid kick to the teacher's ribs. Vlad saw the fight, but he was too far away as the mob was collapsing in on him, their sheer numbers beginning to overwhelm him. Shigaraki followed through on the spin kick, coming to his knees, his hand reaching a perfect angle to hit Aizawa's arm. Huryu sprang into action. Before he knew what he was doing, he fired his quirk, hitting Shigaraki in the back. Tsu was shocked, but she backed him up by using her tongue to lash out and snag his leg, yanking him to the ground. She pulled it back as soon as she removed it to get out of his reach as quickly as possible. Some of the backline villains spun seeing the students. They smiled and went to launch their attack, when Tetsu burst from cover and body checked a few of them into the rest. Denki came stumbling out behind him near Tsu and Huryu. "Denki, are you okay?" Tsu shouted as she leaped forward and kicked another villain with a picture-perfect drop kick. "Getting there, wait, need minute," he slurred back. "I will protect you," Huryu said defensively before him. Eraserhead yelled for them to retreat as he drove an elbow into the back of Shigaraki's head. The villain was still conscious as he went to finish the job. No one saw what hit him until it was standing there. The monster that had gone to the front door had returned. Under one arm was Kurogiri. With the other, he backhanded Eraserhead away with thunderous force. Everyone on the battlefield froze. Landslide zone. Shiva twirled gracefully, evading the incoming flame with a graceful spin, and retaliated with a precision shot. Her aim was true. but the flames formed a fiery wall that absorbed the impact. Nito, seizing the opportunity, launched a swift kick to her chest, sending her flying backward. As she rose, she summoned a towering ice pillar that struck Nito in the stomach, causing him to double in agony. Desperate to regain footing, he lunged forward to attack, but Shiva was too quick. With lightning-fast reflexes, she landed a powerful punch, transforming her arm into a solid white ice block. The impact was bone-jarring and left Nito reeling, his senses dulled by the ferocity of the blow. Shiva needed to press her advantage to rejoin her bother in battle against the true target of their attacks. Still, this other, who had exhibited multiple quirks, was proving to be a difficult opponent. Though less skilled than her or her brother, he could compensate for his lack of skill and tenacity. He was stunned and reeling from her punch. It was her chance to finish this. She brought a devastating knee to his face, breaking his nose. As he fell back, she went to follow him down with a forearm to his temple. As she attacked, massive, gloved yellow hands grabbed her from behind, lifting her and slamming her back with devastating effect. She tried to regain her feet when the strange face was above her. She had forgotten about their companion, and glue cascaded down onto her face before she could react. The thickness of the substance began to seep into her nose and mouth. She was being suffocated. She panicked and tried to call upon her quirk to push him off, but she couldn't focus. When the darkness overcame her, she couldn't even weep as her ducts were covered in glue. Thankfully, Bondo was not a murderer. He pulled a vial from a pouch and applied it to the glue around her nose. With skillful movement, he pulled the glue from her nose to free up her air passage. There, she should be out for a bit. We must take care of the other to find Toru. He looked over at Nito, who was holding ice to his jaw. Nito nodded as they went towards where Shoto was engaged in combat. Shoto and the boy were in this dance of ice and fire. Each would gain an advantage only for the other to surge back and put their opponent on their back foot. Shoto had trained against a powerful fire user his whole life. From what he had witnessed, this boy's sister was a very adept ice user. They must spar constantly. The difference was that, while the boy's fire did not burn as hot as his father's, he controlled the fire in a way that Shoto had never seen. It would dance and bend to the boy's will, where his opponent had the advantage, and that advantage was wearing Shoto down. When their two blasts collided again, the explosion knocked them both off their feet. Shoto was dazed. He barely saw the two fire cats coming at him in a pincer maneuver. He quickly created two ice walls to the side to deflect the attack, and that was his undoing. Hellfire flame. He heard his opponent roar, and a blood-red flame came tearing for him. Everything moved in slow motion as he saw the flames. He desperately tried to summon a wall of ice to try and deflect it. But he knew from experience that such a red flame had taken almost everything he had. His only hope was that he could stop enough to live. However, he knew that such a thought was wishful thinking. He wondered what his father would say when he received news that he had died and would die here. He had to live. He needed to live. But why? Why was he so desperate to live? Was it to show that bastard that he didn't need his fire? Was it to show his mother that her ice was all he needed? Would it even matter to her? They hadn't seen each other since the incident. At first, they told him to keep him away because she was sick. But Fayumi and Natsuo had seen her. They told him she was getting better, and that he should see her. But he never did. How could he live? Ice wouldn't save him. If he could generate a strong enough ice blast, the explosion may kill him. If not, leave him prone enough for his opponent to finish him off. Fire? He had seen his father do it. A bigger fire blast would stop the other. He had seen his father do it when training some of his sidekicks. Fire was the answer. It would save his life. I realized the only way to live was fire, the most bitter thing. But he was still left with the question of why. What did he want? He wanted to be a hero. He wanted to be a hero who would save people, someone greater than his father. He had sought the path of using only his ice to spite his father and shove it in his face. Would his father even care? The more he thought about it, the more he hated the taste of the bitter pill on his tongue. His father was stubborn, single-minded, and blinded by his anger. Shoto was stubborn, single-minded, and blinded by his bitterness. His bitterness toward his father was going to kill him. Ice couldn't beat this boy alone. His opponent trained daily against a stronger ice user. But he didn't prepare against fire. Shoto closed his eyes, and instead of death, he saw flame. His anger and bitterness fueled it, and it was ready to be released. With a mighty roar, he did just that. Nito and Bondo rounded the corner and leaped back to cover as Shoto's fire collided with the hellfire flame. One was blood red, but Shoto's fire exploded in pure white, engulfing the red flame and causing his opponent to dive for cover. He was in shock, his mind desperately trying to find the next action, when some heavy and herd collided with the back of his head, and darkness took hold. Toru stood over the unconscious villain. Her body racked with pain from the burns, and she stumbled to the side. She heard her name being called as Nito and Bondo were running towards her area. Nito was able to locate her. She felt relieved when he carefully reached her with coolness radiating from his hands. She saw him hesitate as he got closer. She could tell he was worried about touching her in the wrong spot. She gently moved his hand under her knees and pulled others under her shoulders. She had never had someone be so conscious of where they were grabbing her before. Mountain zone. Izuku gathered himself. The wound in his gut, while not deep, was enough to draw blood. His leg was bandaged, but it would hinder his movement. Momo was bleeding from the back, Set was down a hand, and Kyoka had an injured shoulder. The man-spider was dangerous. He had a look in his eye that Izuku had been trained to recognize. He was here for blood and misery. He wouldn't stop killing them. His intentions were apparent with the hunger his eyes portrayed, and it was a hunger for all of them. The ninja glided as they moved, their blade behind them, skilled and trained. Eyes cold, focused on him. The dispassionate nature in their eyes told him this was business, that they didn't come here on some desire for death, or for other things to sake some thirst. They came here to do one thing, kill. The way they looked at him made him think that the person they were there to kill was him. I got the ninja. They seem hyper-focused on me, he told the girls. Be careful of that man, I know, was all Momo responded. A glow from her back produced some machetes. Aim for the joins on his legs. Her abdomen glowed, and glaive polearm came out. She took it in hand as Set and Kyoka grabbed the machetes. Oh yes, I love it when the struggle, he moaned. Struggle hard with all you can. I want to see you break and submit to me. As he talked, to small canisters looking like gas grenades were sticking out her back. Set and Kyoka immediately took them as Momo moved to engage. Izuku advanced towards the ninja, cautious, his staff at the ready. Do you have a name? I am Hidashirazu, a cold, flat voice responded. Then everything around Izuku went dark. Momo came in and took a swing towards one of the legs. As expected, he pulled it back and was able to balance on the others. Another came up and over to stab at her. She spun past it as Set came in behind her and, with great precision, was able to swing her bat at the hoof. Set smiled when she heard it crack. He reared in pain. Kyoka blasted him with a sonic attack, throwing him off balance further. The man-spider flailed wildly, the black ooze flying everywhere. Momo let out a cry as some landed on her thigh, and immediately, she felt it begin to burn and eat at the skin. Set panicked and pulled Momo back as Kyoka tried to press the advantage. Momo knew she had to get it off and created a piece of leather thigh armor on the spot she had been hit. As it came out of her leg, she could feel the ooze come off her skin and begin to eat the armor piece. Kyoka swung the machete, but unfortunately for her, she hit a solid part of the leg. While the villain did scream when it yanked back, the weapon was taken away from her. The sudden shift in balance knocked her to the ground. Before she could scramble back to her feet, he reached down and pulled her into his embrace. She froze for a second as massive mandibles came out of his mouth. Her arms pinned, she took her jacks and plunged them as deep as she could into his eyes. His scream nearly knocked her out as he dropped her to the ground. Momo and Set saw their opportunity and ran in, ready to rejoin the fray. Izuku was surprised by the sudden darkness, but he quickly summarized that it had to be Hitoshirezu's quirk. Their name translated was unseen. He tried to focus his hearing, but it wasn't fast enough to evade. But he did manage to deflect the blow, preventing it from being fatal. The sword had come at his side, and before it could bite too deep, he deflected it away with his staff. He rolled away, trying to create a mental map of his surroundings. He spun his staff around himself and felt a clank where he suspected a part of the mountain was. He put his back to it, cutting off an avenue of attack. The sound of the girls fighting the man-spider was making this task difficult. Blind fighting had been particularly difficult for Izuku to learn, and he was no master at it. He heard the attack at the last possible second. He deflected the blade upwards and ducked low. He took a swing at where he hoped his opponent would be and caught nothing but air. But his opponent was not about to let him catch his breath. The sword sliced across his back. Thankfully, his armor held. He repositioned himself, doing his best to steady the panic. Kyoka would have been able to take this villain down quickly with her hearing. Izuku focused, shutting out what he could and listening for movement near him. Unseen, they were not silent. They had to move through dirt, and shifting earth under their feet made sound. Listen for the sound, he told himself. He heard it quickly, and his staff lashed out to deflect the blow. As he followed through, the black sword came to his hand in a deadly downward arc. At the last second, he twisted the blade so the flat came crashing down instead of the edge. He heard the scream as his sight returned. Nothing stopped the black blade, nothing he had encountered anyway. It cut through bone and flesh like a stick sliding into the water. He knew that this villain would be no more if he had continued with the blade. Hitoshirezu's shoulder and collarbone shattered under the blow, and they crumpled to the ground as a round knob of the staff came crashing across their jaw, breaking it. Thankfully, they couldn't feel the pain unconscious. The man-spider lunged at the haired girl, its two talon legs aiming to strain for her. When she didn't move, he smirked in triumph. Surly when the others saw one of their dies, their will to fight would crumple. But his attack hit nothing but air. As Set split at the last second, dodging the attack, she pulled the pin and threw the canister. It exploded in the villain's face, the gas involved their head, and the agony began. It burned. It was pure pain. He stumbled back, screaming as another canister exploded against his back legs. He didn't think the pain could intensify till he felt something cleave through one of those legs, sending him crumpling to the floor. He saw a leg twitching severed from his body. The girl with black hair whirled and swung her polearm again, taking off another of the spider limbs. His eyes felt like they were on fire and going to explode. And then the girl with the lobs came rushing in. The sweet kiss of unconsciousness was welcome at this point. The girls looked at each other as Momo walked over, creating saline. She flushed the villain's eyes as the cuffs dropped out. Kyoka secured the villain. Afterward, Momo sat on a rock and devoured some calorie bars. Set ensured they hadn't missed anyone while Kyoka went and helped patch up Izuku's side. She smiled at her gratefully. The sounds of battle could still be heard. Wearily got to their feet and started moving towards the next zone. Windstorm Zone. It was a massive free-for-all. Jirodo was in the middle as the villains attempted to swarm him under. That meant they weren't protecting their flank. Yui, Fumi, and Koji made them pay. Dark Shadow snaked across the ground till it could take up position back-to-back with Jiroda. Fumi was not a fighter, but he could swing a baton provided to him by Yui. Koji's hardened look was not for show. He knew now was not the time to be peaceful, that they were fighting for their lives. Like the animals he loved, he had been backed into a corner, and he would not be timid. Yui was a force of nature and tenacity. She threw some items on the ground and activated her quirk. Large concrete barricades sprang to life, throwing villains into the air. Those who turned on the girl wished they hadn't. When a villain landed, what they felt was a devastating right cross. Her bloody smile froze them in their place. They were apologizing as she descended upon them. Dark shadow raged alongside Jirota, as the two were grabbing villains and throwing them aside or tearing into them. The ferocity of their attacks seemed to feed off the other, as they physically demonstrated to these villains that they had made wrong choices in their lives, leading to this moment. It was chaotic and messy, but in the end, the young heroes, though bruised, stood victorious. Yui looked at the boys. There are more of these bastards out there attacking our friends. I think we should go meet them and remind them why no one fucks with UA, she yelled. They raced to the next battle. The front door. It landed with a thud, cracking the metal plates as it did so. It was the monster. Its unblinking eyes looked over and past everyone to Kurogiri. The students tensed. They knew what the beast had come for. Nyan didn't even get to yell out anything other than move, as the best was by Mist's villain's side in an instant. It trampled over its allies without a care, or even seeming to notice that it had done so. Juro quickly activated his quirk as Pony fired her horns at the monster. The beast ignored the girl's attack. It did look curiously at its legs as they began to sink into the ground. Riko tried to yank the beast, but it was too heavy. Quickly, she pulled on its arms and lurched forward, its arms sinking into the softened ground. Juzo immediately cut his quirk. Yos ran in and tagged the monster's legs, welding them to the ground. They surrounded the beast, reading themselves. They were woefully unprepared as the beast wrenched its arms free by tearing them off. It did the same to its legs as Juzo yelled for it to stop. The lack of any scream of pain would haunt Pony for years. They stumbled back as the limbs began to regrow. Nyan leaped in, swinging with all his might, activating his quirk. There was no effect. The beast swung, and by sheer luck, Nyan dodged. Ochako attacked, hoping to tag the best with her quirk. The beast turned to meet her attack, a monstrous downward punch coming towards her. She stumbled and fell. Ryuko yanked with all her might, pulling the fist to the side. The impact left no doubt that Ochako would have been turned to paste. She scrambled to her feet as the monster reached out to grab her. You will not touch her, you monster! Sato roared as he leaped into the air, bringing a thunderous axe kick to the monster's shoulder area. Everyone's heart soared and fell instantly, as there was no effect. Sato could kick off and land out of the monster's grasp. In an instant, the monster was on them. Sato and Juzo were sent flying by a thunderous backhand that reverberated throughout the area. Pony tacked Ryuko out of the way of another attack, but she didn't clear the blow completely, and the impact caught her leg, breaking it. Ochako swallowed her fear and ran in and tagged the monster on the back. As she slid under the thing's legs, desperately she tried to run. Nyan threw a rock, pegging the monster in the head, gaining the thing's attention. Nyan knew he was done for. He did his best to anticipate the thing's attack, hoping to survive. He barely saw the fist coming for him. He was done for. Suddenly, the word block appeared before him, stopping the blow. Nyan saw Manga standing there, and he dropped to a knee. Yuga slid next to him. Behold my twinkling light, you monster! He yelled as his naval laser ripped forth, striking the beast. Again, joy was snatched as a portal opened, and the beast came flying back towards them. It was Sen's turn. He knocked the beast off course, sending it crashing off to the side. The monster was up in an instant. It raised its massive hands over its head and slammed them down, creating a massive shockwave, sending debris flying everywhere, and its opponents diving for cover. It ripped Kurogiri free and leaped back to the plaza. Forest zone. Shiro, Shihai, and Kinoko emerged carefully from the underground into a ring of trees. They did their best to listen, seeing if they were about to be attacked. but instead they could hear cries of distress. Kanoko took the lead, moving cautiously as Shiro limped behind her. Shihai took to the shadows to cautiously scout ahead. His sudden reappearance in front of his companions startled them. "We need to hurry, Kosai is badly injured." He led them forward. When the camp bursting through, they were almost attacked by Ibara and Mizo. They saw Kosai lying on the ground holding his stomach that had more bandaging than they thought possible. Mina was against a tree shaking. They saw bandaging on her as well. They saw the bear villain and the way his head was at an unnatural angle and said nothing. They ran over to see what aid they could give their allies. Kanoko created some mushrooms and handed them out. Some had natural pain relief for Mina and Kosai, and she gave that had sweetness to them for Ibara and Mizo. She pulled Ibara aside and asked what had happened. To Ibara's credit, she was able to give a description of the battle. She did falter at the bear, and when she told them what happened, Kanoko understood. Shiro stood there for a moment concentrating before some tape started coming out. "It should be better to hold you together, and it's sterile. Enough, I think. Mizo, we need to get a stretcher made up so we can transport him out of here. He need medical." Mizo nodded, thankful for something to do. Shiro distributed some capture tape to Shihai, whispering something to him. "Mina, we should make sure all the villains are secure. Can you help me with that?" The pink-skinned girl was able to nod as they moved off. The sounds of battle continued off in the distance. They knew the attack was not over, but they needed to get Kosai medical attention, because if not then, even if they survived, they would be attending a funeral for sure. Focusing on their tasks was a good way to get the forest group back and moving. Soon they had Kosai loaded with Mizo and Shiro carrying him, and him using his extra appendages to help listen for any ambushes. He was able to alert them before the trap was sprung. Shihai nodded and moved off, taking the first one by surprise. The other two didn't have a chance when Mina and Ibara descended upon them. Their attack was brutal and quick. Though Kanoko noticed that Mina didn't use her quirk at all, and Ibara used it only at the beginning to pull the villain to her, then not again. Even they all lived through today. They would never be the same. The plaza. Su and Tetsu went to work making their way towards Vlad King, who was trying to get to erase her head. The monster lifted the dazed and very angry Shigaraki to their feet. "Stupid mobs," he roared. "I want them broken and bleeding before me, you useless idiots. Namu, finish off the teachers." He spat, turning his attention to students. "Kirigiri, bring in the reinforcements. Time to die, children." More portals opened in the plaza as the villains' numbers were replenished. "Time to die, children," Shigaraki roared as the battle began anew. The ruins zone. Itsuka stumbled, desperately trying to pull herself up. This man, this villain, waited patiently for her to return to her feet. "You can surrender anytime now," she spat out. "But I need your name to give the police when they find you after I beat your ass." He smiled a big toothy grin. "Anvil." "Yeah, that checks out." She stood again, leaning against the wall. "Okay, ready for that ass beating," he nodded, raising his fists. She went to move forward, but her body collapsed. "That is enough, Anvil," a woman's voice rang out. Itsuka lifted her head, and a woman stepped out of a doorway. She was wearing a black lace gown with a sweetheart bust line, and embroidered lace ran along her arms. Her porcelain white skin shone through from underneath. It was an almost unnatural white. The only source of color was her red nails and ruby lips. Most of her face was hidden by a veil. Her long black hair seemed made of shadow black, cascaded out down her back just above the ground, and the tips were stark white, the same as her skin. They collected like dagger points, perfectly grouped. "Yes, most holy," the man known as Anvil said. "Miss?" The woman's hypnotic voice rang out. Ajiro came crashing to the ground unconscious as his opponent landed gently. "Yes, most holy." "Enough playing," the woman chastised. "You all should give up once I get my second wind." Itsuka clawed towards Ajiro, putting her body between them. "I see it now," Miss said quietly. Itsuko was losing her battle as darkness began encroaching on her mind. She saw the woman approach and crouch near Itsuka. Now listen carefully. The Ust. Nyrn struggled to his feet, as did Pony, gritting her teeth through the pain of her broken leg. She was not about to die or allow worse to happen while she lay on her back. She was going to go down swinging just like her parents taught her. Ryuko was by her side, watching as villains retook the field and the enemy's reinforcements came through. With a mighty leap, Sue landed beside her broken homeroom teacher. She heard him mutter about getting away. "Sir, that is not an option anymore." She struggled to lift the man to his feet when she managed to get back to Vlad and Tetsu as they retreated to the stairs. Denki appeared next to them with Huryu. Denki moved to help Sue, freeing Tetsu to take up the defense with Vlad. Ochako and Nyrn came from the top of the stairs, negating Izuku's gravity and allowing him to be more easily transported. Shigaraki stared sadistically at the small group of students. "Today is the day that you die for placing your faith in a system that has blinded you from the truth. Bring me their bodies." The villains grinned as they began their advance. Shigaraki didn't see the attack that yanked him into the air. Suddenly, vines wrapped around his waist and threw him high. The Namu spun, witnessing the group coming from behind. He saw Shigaraki airborne and went to catch his master, only for his legs to be suddenly encased in ice. The villains about to attack began to scream, and 55-gallon drums and barricades rained down on them, with the students from the windstorm zone's arrival. Jirota let loose a war cry as he came leaping over the railing and crashing down into the middle of them. Like before, Dark Shadow positioned at his back as they ripped violently at the surrounding villains. Using the element of surprise, the rest of the students began to arrive, and an avalanche of violence descended upon the villains. Their screams filled the air. Ijiro waded into battle side by side with Toguro. He didn't know what to think. He had been so wrapped up in his hatred for Izuku and, by extension, 1B that he had been prepared to write them off. Yet, on the battlefield, he saw his other classmates, even those who shared his opinion, wading into battle next to those they had dismissed as lesser than or worse. He then saw him, Izuku Midoriya, the boy rushing in the point of a spear with Momo and Kyoka at his flanks, as they waded into the battle. A simple but vicious brutality was displayed as he knocked down a villain. The girls would remedy that situation violently if that villain were not unconscious. Setsuna took the air, relaying as much as she could to her group as she went to grab the makeshift stretcher that bore Kosai to get him to the doors, where the other injured were being guarded as the battle in the plaza was raging. There were so many villains that they couldn't be held in one area. Those that slipped past thought those by the door would be easy pickings, only to find that those who had stayed up there were ready for their attack. Shoto sneered at the monster he had encased. "You are done for, monster." Bondo, and he watched in horror as the monster ripped its legs clean off to escape the ice. Their horror intensified as they saw the torn limbs begin to regrow. Bondo launched his quirk at the thing's arms only to witness the gruesome display replay itself. "It has such powerful regeneration. How do we stop it?" Bondo yelled, backing away. "Put me down," Toru said to Nito, who was trying to move around the edges to get her to safety. "But you hurt," he protested. "And if we don't figure a way out of this, I am going to be dead, along with many other people," Toru said, quivering slightly. "If we are going to die, I want to die doing hero shit." Nito smiled. "Then let's go do hero shit." He set her down. He heard her start to move away. "Don't die, Toru." "You neither, Nito," she called as she slinked off to add more mayhem to the enemy's backlines. Shigaraki was airborne when something emerged from his shadow, and with a mighty double axe handle smash, he crashed back into the ground. Shihai quickly retreated after his attack. As his group joined the battle, they saw the monster ripping limbs away as it seemed almost desperate to get at Bondo and Shoto. Mina ran forward and sprayed the thing with acid. It didn't scream, but she saw its flesh melt only to regrow, The monster fell through a portal only to appear a few feet away, fully healed. They didn't see it coming. A sense of self-preservation allowed some of them to guard. Mina got her hands up, but a massive blow still shattered one of her horns and sent her flying, her orbital socket broken. Mizo could block part of the blow to his ribs, though they still cracked. His other arms sprang forth, trapping the limb against his body. When the other arm went to tear the boy apart, Siro's tape jumped forth, binding it to the ground. Ibara's vines grabbed the beast's legs. She screamed in pain as they pulled the beast to the ground, and they tore from her head. Shoto leaped forward and encased the creature in ice, pinning it to the ground and rendering it unable to move. Only its head was freely pressed into the ground. Shigaraki sprang to his feet as Kurogiri began to summon a portal to free their monster. Fire erupted around Kurogiri. The mist villain screamed and fell back as staff flew, tangling Shigaraki's legs and sending him tumbling to the floor. Shigaraki rolled and found a halberd pointed at him and a sword wielded by two girls. "Call them off," a green-haired boy said as he picked up the staff that had knocked him to the ground. "Stupid mobs," Shigaraki growled. He kiped up, intentionally leaning into the halberd to take the stab, throwing Momo off guard. His hand grabbed the blade, destroying it in an instant, and he kicked her in the gut. He spun narrowly, avoiding a sword swipe from Kyoka. When his hand flashed out to grab the girl by the face, Izuku impaled it. The villain grits his teeth through the pain, his free hand falling on the staff. It began to disintegrate. Izuku felt a pain in his chest as he watched his master's weapon disappear. Kurogiri bit through the pain and opened a portal under the monster. Once able to move again, it tore its limbs free and landed on its feet, the ground shaking as it did. The students were nothing but dolls for it to toss around like toys. Nito began to panic, but he knew he had to get them out of there before they died. He leaped on the Kurogiri in a frenzy to try and touch the man to copy his quirk. He grit his teeth and plunged his fingers into the shadow villain's eyes. He needed a target, and he needed to negate the villain at the same time. Kurogiri screamed as the boy's thumbs found their way home. The monster was about to crush Mina, who had been thrown into Miso and Ibara, when a portal opened underneath them, dropping them by the doors. Nito felt like his head was about to explode from all the quirk usage, but he pushed through. "It's just another scar. I can bear it for my class." Shigaraki saw his targets falling into portals to safety. The rest of the student body rallied, desperately driving their attackers back. They could no longer try to disable them. The students were fighting for their lives. Desperation and watching more and more of their classmates took its toll. They began to snap, and the violence of the assault began to spread chaos through the villains. Jiroda broke the knife blade that was protruding from his gut. He reached down and, with a massive roar, tore the arms off the villain who had stabbed him. Yui was running out of things to disrupt the villains. Instead, she leaped on one, savagely beating the villain until it stopped moving. Ijiro saw the bloodbath beginning. The rage and fear were seeping out, infecting all it touched. He didn't see the massive hammer that came crashing into his back, driving him to the floor, his hardened form cracking. He rolled onto his back and managed to deflect the blow aimed at his head, his arms cracking under the blow. The villain was a man who was slight in stature, but had massively muscular ape-like arms. Without losing momentum, the hammer was high over his head and ready to come crashing down again. Toguro saw the boy from one fall as he ducked under a villain's attack. The villain's nails had grown long and black, sharp as razors when they ripped him across the chest and back. All Togoro's life, he had had to learn how to deal with cuts, how to fight with blades and not kill, not cut people down or end their lives. Add on his mutation, and his life had been one that carried a long, hard road to get where he was. He saw it all, his classmates and allies being hurt, the brutality they were not using to stay alive. When the villains would collapse upon a student, they were in a frenzy of violence and ill intentions. Clothing was being ripped and clawed at, and Ryuko ripped the eyes out of a group of villains that had descended upon her and Pony. Toguro watched as the monster had sent his allies flying through the air. It was all devolving so quickly. He then felt the burning from the wounds. He saw the unmistakable liquid glint in the light from his opponent's claws, the poison of some sort. He saw Ijiro fall. He saw the incredible blows from the hammer cracking and chipping the boy's body. Toguro knew how not to kill because he had also learned to do so. He could only think of his family, his little sister receiving the news that he was dead. He knew that he had to make it home to them. He had to make it out of this damn place. When the attack came, he deflected with one blade as another formed on his elbow. The shower of sparks from the blades clashing gave him a clear look into his opponent's eyes. He saw no remorse, no sorrow, only a desire for blood and death. He gave them that. He spun past the attack, and the blade sprang from his elbow as he did. It traced across the villain's throat, severing everything but the spinal cord. The world began to darken as the burning sensation was now everywhere, flooding his body. He continued his momentum. The blade scraped across the floor as he raised it in a rising slash. The hammer villain's arms were descending, ready to turn Ijiro into rubble. The sound of the blade, the flash of light as he saw it come into view. He cut upwards and threw the villain's arms just above the elbows, severing them. Blood sprayed across Ijiro as he saw Toguro stumble and fall to the ground. Shigaraki watched as he saw Kurogiri fall. He turned and reached to end the threat of the Kyoka. She fell back out of reach, but he grabbed her jack, and she screamed as it disappeared in his hand. He sneered as he was ready to fall upon her when a massive black sword removed his hand from his body, and a baseball bat cracked against his skull, sending him toppling to the side. Momo just punted the severed hand away as Kyoko pulled a knife and cut her ear cord just from the lob. As the decay was running up the line, Shigaraki couldn't focus. His head had been busted open, he had lost a hand, and he screamed nonsense about the state of heroes. He didn't even see the massive black blade coming for his head. The monster did. Izuku saw movement. He was able to place the blade flat to block the attack. It was what saved his life as he was knocked away and into the wall. Ryuko reached out with her quirk and yanked Izuku to the side as the monster's next attack would have splattered him. Naoto ran, seeing the severed hand. He prayed, and when he grabbed it, he knew what needed to be done. Toru lifted a baton that had been discarded to the side and wadded into the villains with brutal efficiency to find soft spots and spots that were not so soft. But after she was done, they were. He saw Shoto making it back to his feet. Shoto, freeze it. I need to touch it. It was all in slow motion. As Shoto sent a wave of ice at the monster, Nito dived into a portal before dropping the mist villain's quirk and taking on Shigaraki's. Shigaraki saw a portal open above the Namu, and a blonde-haired boy in a ripped and battered suit came diving out. He saw the boy land on the Anti-All Might's shoulders. Nito grits his teeth and grabs the monster's exposed brain, activating the quirk. The monster's scream froze everyone on the battlefield as Decay went to work against the monster's regeneration. The beast brought its massive fists up to squash Nito. The great black sword managed to cut one limb off, but Izuku stumbled and could not stop the second arm. It came up and just crashed into Nito's stomach cavity. Blood flew from Nito's mouth. The quirk faltered. He could feel it. Ijiro was there, and with the mighty swing of one Toguru's blade, it bit deep into the monster's other arm. It screamed again, thrashing violently this way and that. Ijiro was thrown to the ground. Hero shit! Nito roared as he poured every ounce of his being into the quirk. All he had, with his last breath, was to end this monster. Shoto saw the fight between this monster regeneration and what every Nito was trying. He saw the massive fist inside the boy's body, and then heard the cry as he saw someone willing to lay it all, to give everything for what he believed in. He wasn't even aware he did it as the pillar of flame exploded next to the beast, severing the other arm. It was a white-hot flame. It consumed the arm, and where it had cut the arm from the monster, it would not grow back. Shigaraki, foaming at the mouth, blood pouring from the stump where one of his hands once was not about to let this raid end this way. He stumbled, reaching for Nito. The Namu was not on its knees as it lost the decay battle. Izuku saw him coming and went for Nito. He tried to move, but his body was a wreck from the monster hit. "Fucking die, you mob," Shigaraki yelled. Ryaiko's quirk flared out, yanking Shigaraki's hand out and away as a shot echoed in the Osti. Shigaraki looked down at his chest and saw the blood begin to ooze out as his brain told him he had been shot. His eyes trailed up. There was Momo. She was holding a revolver in her hand, the barrel smoking. She fired again. It hit home. Shigaraki stumbled again as another shot rang, then another. He fell to his knees. His life is ebbing away. He looked down at his chest, then looked to the Namu as it turned to ash, the blonde falling to the floor as he saw the gaping hole in the boy's side. "No, Itai," he coughed as blood came from his mouth, his lungs filling with blood. "Kill all might, the League is over." Momo's voice rang out over the silent battlefield. The next shot rang out, but it didn't hit him in the chest. Instead, it would have pierced his brain. Shigaraki and Kurogiri fell into portals, but unlike the purple smoke, these were like a black oil-like substance. Nito fell to the ground, and as Izuku stumbled toward him, he saw tears in his classmate's eyes. "Do you think it will be a good scar?" Nito said as Izuku cradled him in his arms. "It is going to be amazing. Now hold on, okay? I need you to hold on, Nito." Izuku's voice broke as he fought back tears. "There is a hole in me. I don't think there are enough bandages for that," Nito said with a smile. "That's right. But I have something better than bandages." They turned to see Kinoko coming towards them, the air filling with spores that drifted down onto everyone. She smiled as they invaded the open wounds. She activated her quirk. The wound on his side was closed. "Mushrooms will save us all." Kinoko threw her arms in the air as her eyes rolled back, and she fell to the ground unconscious. Kosai began to cough as his eyes opened, and mushrooms erupted from his stomach cavity. All over their wounds, mushrooms sprouted. Toguru, who suddenly felt better, sat up and saw mushrooms sprouting from his chest. The poison neutralized, and the bleeding stopped. The door to the Osti exploded as the faculty came storming in. The remaining villains just surrendered, the students too stunned to move, too broken to react. Izuku looked at the mushrooms sprouting all over him and everyone. "Quirks are bullshit," Izuku muttered. After the faculty had given the signal, third years began to flood the area, taking villains into custody, moving students, and aiding the first responders as the mushroom plugs were great, and all the underlying problems were still there. Being disemboweled was not magically fixed by mushrooms, but it gave the medical professionals a chance that wouldn't have been there without them. All Might looked upon the haunted faces of the heroic class, students and teachers being evacuated to attempt to save their lives. He heard some of the murmurs from the students. This attack had happened in an attempt to kill him. These children had suffered through this because someone was trying to get to them. What if they had succeeded? One for All would have died with him. He needed to find a successor, and was required to do so quickly. The medical wing at the UA was well known for its state-of-the-art technology and top-notch staff, consisting of recovery girl and a few nurses. That was what the people knew. What wasn't known was the state-of-the-art trauma center under the medical wing and the dozens of doctors and nurses that staffed it in times of emergency. That emergency call had gone out as soon as Ida had come to the doorstep. Emergency surgeries were underway within minutes of the wounded arrival. Everyone would be staying the night in the medical wing. Not a single soul that boarded that bus was going home tonight, or was in any condition to do so. Nezu looked over the first years with rage, horror, and sympathy, with a helping of wrath. He knew that you have restrictions upon yourself when you go into a battle, lines you won't cross. Then, as the struggle continues and situations worsen, you begin to cross those lines to come home alive. Self-preservation is a motherfucker. They were exhausted, wounded, and trying not to let the silence drive them mad, because when it was silent, your mind would begin to question all the things you did to be able to lie in a bed tonight. They would fall asleep, awake screaming, ready to fight, calling out for another student. He knew that not all would make it, that not only was UA's reputation about to be dealt a significant blow, but the first-year hero course would never be the same. Nezu was unique. There was nothing like him in this world. He would never marry, nor would he have children of his own. At least not again. He had a mate and offspring once upon a time. They didn't have names, but he could see them when he slept. See them and feel the love for them. He didn't know it was love then. He was too primitive. But he remembered what it was like when they were taken out of the cage and never returned. He made one of the scientists tell him how they died before Nezu killed him. Someone had come into his home and tried to make him feel that loss again. What made Nezu so dangerous was when he focused on a single thing, a single idea. That idea today was revenge. Ijiro. Of all the fucking luck, I am in goddamn bed next to this motherfucker, he thought. He glanced over to see Izuku wake up and look around before settling back down. Hey, would you tell me the truth if I asked you a question? Ijiro finally said, using the buttons on the bed to bring himself to a sitting position. His arms were cast, as well as his chest. Izuku looked at him. Sure, I highly doubt you will believe me since you hate me. What? I came in and apologized, Ijiro deflected. Look, your mouth said one thing, but your eyes said something else, Izuku said, still looking at the ceiling tiles. Also, I know the look of hate. I have seen it enough to recognize it. You are not very good at hiding it. Why did you provoke Bakugo? Ijiro said. I didn't. I hadn't seen Bakugo in over a decade. Izuku paused momentarily. We knew each other when we were kids, same kindergarten kind of bullshit. When my quirk didn't come in, we stopped being friends. He fell down this one time, and I offered to help him up. Yeah, that didn't go well. You're lying, Ijiro said, clinging to the story he had made up. Why would I fucking lie? Izuku said. So you would like me? I could care less if you do or don't. Did you like to grow up with him or something? No, I met him the first day, Ijiro said quickly. Then why are you clinging to this idea that he was a good person and not some piece of shit? Izuku sat up and looked at Ijiro. Was it love at first sight or something? I have seen the videos he was talking shit to everyone. He called you shitty hair and told you to shut up. No, I wasn't in love with him. Ijiro stopped and thought about it. He was just cool, I guess. He was confident. His quirk kicked ass. I thought that he would be a good hero someday. I would say you are stupid. But I know what you had to score on the written exam to get into this school, Izuku replied. Fuck you. So, let's just say in the 12 hours you knew and interacted with him, did you ever see me near him? No, Ijiro said with a slight sulk. I didn't get a smartphone till after the fight, so that I couldn't have texted him. The last time I saw him, there was no way I would have had his phone number, and that was when my parents died and I moved. So genius, when did I talk to him? Izuku said. You can say before or after the first day of school, but he seemed rather surprised to see me, so that would be a no, and obviously that meant we didn't bump into each other during the exam. Ijiro wanted to retort, to keep the story he had fabricated in his head. Yeah, but his quirk? What about it? I kicked his ass. I could kick a lot of my class and your class's ass, but not all of them, no way, Izuku said with such confidence and tone that it came across as fact. If I got the drop, then maybe, but straight up head to head, nope. I couldn't beat you without seriously hurting you with my sword. Your sword couldn't do shit to me, Ijiro said defensively. Yeah, you can think that, but I would put it to the test if I were you, Izuku said with a shrug. Bakugo has a powerful quirk, but he is all about beating the shit of villains. You have a great quirk for a hero, and so do many of your classmates. Ijiro paused, and Izuku continued. Look, man, I am quirkless. Bakugo attacked me for that reason. You probably don't like me for the same reason. Fuck you, man, I am not a quirkiest, Ijiro said, his anger rising. You and everyone around have a dream of being a hero, of being the next All Might. Yeah, so, Ijiro said. So what happens when someone without a quirk can do the same thing, and, in the case of some of you, better than you, Izuku said. He could see Ijiro about to respond. Without your quirk, I would beat your ass because I have trained harder than you. I want to be a hero to show the world that anyone can be a hero. No matter their quirk, they can be a hero. I would bet you in the fight, Ijiro said. When we get out of here, I know a gym we can go to test that out. No quirk, Izuku said. But we are getting off track. Bakugo attacked a quirkless kid and girl trying to check on his classmate. Why? I don't know, Ijiro said. If Bakugo's whole identity is built around how he will be this amazing hero because he has this amazing quirk, what will happen when someone without a quirk also becomes a hero? Izuku just stared at Ijiro. The other kids in the room were just quiet. You provoked him to weaken our class. Ijiro grasped at his last line of defense. For what? Izuku said, incredibly confused. So you can score higher in the sports festival or other team things, Ijiro responded confidently. Sweet baby Jesus, give me strength, Izuku said, looking to the ceiling. I just need to graduate. Your class means nothing to me. Before you say something about Kyoka and them, I offered to help them so they could stay in school. That is the dumbest fucking thing I ever heard. When I talked to Kyoka about training, there were supposed to be 2 guys, but they said no. Ijiro stared at Izuku. Listen, Ijiro, you need to figure out why you latched onto this image of Bakugo. Look at the facts, then make up your mind. You can hate me, I don't fucking care. You don't have to like me, I don't like you. All I need from you is to know that once I graduate, assuming you do the same, I can trust you to have my back in the field. That's it. So let me know, and if you want to fight, let me know. We can do that too.